That's not. Meetings and agenda.
I have way so much more faith in you than I did previously. Well, I
They're still on the
ladies on time. That was their minute.
actually scheduled later.
Pretty good.
That's right. Solid waste.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was national, but I couldn't remember my name from that.
What did I say?
Whenever they call me man, I think I said goodbye to that. I think Barnes said goodbye to that.
It was very gentle.
I said man all the time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we're going to take we're not late.
Were you at the hotel visit?
I was going to get started after 1 o'clock. Okay.
You know, you can't. Just two left.
Did they get my call?
Well, we can get started, right? Because it is 1 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the March 25th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Siksika First Nations, and our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write it down, your name and the agenda item on the sheet of paper beside Dennis over there. At the start of the question period, the chair will call those who have signed up to address council. And for those who are wondering, I'm chairing this meeting because our council of the whole meeting protocol generally requires that the acting mayor will chair the COW meetings. And so we're going to carry that traditional forward, and the GPC meetings will be chaired by the acting mayor as well. And that information will become locked in policy when we redo our governance and policies committee for our various meetings. So at the first, I would like to introduce, are there any late items?
Thank you, Chair. There are no late items today.
Okay, so I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda. Crowe and Councillor Brown. I'm going to get this here in a second. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. And the first thing on our agenda is the community wellness and livability section. It's the emergency management to be introduced by Karen Fry, our fire chief.
Well, thank you, Chair and Council. I'd like to welcome you to this GPC meeting. I'd like to introduce Ms. Karen Lindsay. She is our manager of our emergency program with the City of Nanaimo, which encompasses the whole city and not strictly the fire department. It is a city function, and she's going to run you through some of our legislature and how our program works. And feel free to hold questions till the end, or ask questions throughout, whatever your preference is. She'll be prepared to take them at that time. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
It should be easy to remember my name because my name is Karen as well. So in the past, the provincial government has done quite extensive sessions on these when new councils came in. So every 4 years they would come in and do a session, and they typically ran about 3 to 4 hours. So I'm going to try and condense a lot of information in a very short period of time. They've changed the format that they're doing it. They were doing it up in a session in Parksville. I think some may have attended from our council, but they put specialized sessions on in there. So we'll go through it, and please feel free to ask me questions as I go along. So today, what I'm going to cover is I'm going to talk a little bit about the emergency management program for the City of Nanaimo. We're going to look at the legislative requirements for the city. We're going to talk about the different hazards in our community, and then we're also going to look at what your role is in particular. There's, as I say, a lot of information, so feel free to ask me as I go along. What I like to do when I start off any presentation, whether it be for staff or for the public in general, I always like to give a perspective, and I know you were given these slides prior to, but I'll read a little bit about it. So we always look to Christchurch, and Christchurch happened in 2011, 185 deaths with it. And the reason we look to Christchurch is that the geography, the buildings, the businesses, the way the community is laid out is something that the province of British Columbia always looks at as to what we can expect, or similarities in how things went there and their government structures to what we can expect here. So they do a lot of years studying what's been going on there. In the initial stages of it, it was in the first 1 or 2 years, there was over 6,000 homes that could not be built where they currently existed. They lost 40% of their tax base. So you can imagine a 40% loss of tax base. They estimate now that the loss of tax base is anywhere between 25 to 30%. People can't build their homes, they still have bills, they need to work, they've got families, they moved away. So that's a significant impact, especially at the local government level. To give you an idea of some of just the mechanics of a response to something like this, 31,000 chemical toilets had to come from China. They had 300 kilometers of damaged streets, 525 disposal tanks, 6 wards of the hospital had collapsed, 321 people arriving for medical assistance within the first 24 hours, and no water. Then we do a comparison to that. So The reason I do this is you can understand when you look at this, just the sheer magnitude of what you're dealing initially, and that's just what you know. So they gave a comparison to Metro Vancouver and Christchurch. The thing that's also important to remember is that the laws of the land still exist. So a big problem for Christchurch was debris management. What do we do with all the rubble? What do we do with all the dirt? What do we do? It's contaminated. When you have a scenario like that, the laws of the land still exist. So you still have to look at the environmental issues. You have to look at, okay, we've got this rubble, what goes where? How do we dispose of this based on what your laws are and how you manage your debris? So it's quite significant. They estimate probably another 3 to 5 years minimum before they even get that city somewhere close to normal. They're still working out of a lot of containers. They have like containers for stores just to give people access to goods and services. So this is actually just a photo of Christchurch the moment that the earthquake hit. I've had a few little pictures up there just to keep your interest in case I so I know this is just exciting stuff, right? So the mission of emergency management is to create and maintain a cooperative organization to manage risks from major emergencies and disasters that may affect the city of Nanaimo. And we like to use the term emergency management, especially in the field. There's a lot of different segments in emergency management that kind of feed into that, but the emergency management reflects the intent to continuously examine actions that might help reduce the likelihood and impact of major emergency and disasters. So that the things that kind of feed into emergency management is emergency planning, training, response. Those are the types of things that feed into that overall encompassing term, so that we're always looking at trying to improve ourselves as we go along. So the functions of emergency management, this was done a few years ago for previous councils. And what I tried to do was to kind of define what are kind of the primary roles for my job. What is it that I try to achieve? So ultimately, we want to be a disaster resilient community. That's our ultimate goal, is to be disaster resilient. We want to deliver training to our city staff. And as Karen mentioned, it truly is a corporate program. I rely on every city department and I rely on every member of staff to support me because I can't do it by myself. And they've been very good at doing that. Everybody rallies to the call. I facilitate training and exercise for our city staff, and then also I do a lot of work with different agencies, not-for-profits, citizenry within the community. So a lot of interagency work, a lot of collaborative work among the different organizations. Updating and developing emergency plans, and then we train and work and test those plans. We're always evaluating and improving the program, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Our post-windstorm event. Look to develop public education. This one becomes a little more challenging, especially after the windstorm event, because I could be doing it 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, nonstop. So we're looking at more creative ways of delivering some public education to the community. One of that being we're having there's a fair coming up within the fire department that I'm going to work at setting a booth up along with others in the department. And then in addition, we're looking at some social media, like some YouTube videos where I can take the presentation that I do and have it on video and then post it on our website for people to watch on their own. It always spikes after we have an incident, and then everybody loses interest, and then it spikes again. So what we also look to do in this department is to identify and understand the risks in our community, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that, and then we plan for both response and recovery. So the program itself is me. It's one full-time emergency manager. We have 25 active volunteers and 25 non-active, and I will talk a little bit about their volunteer program that I manage. To me, they're the heart of my program. I value them extremely. They're extremely valuable to this organization. So our 25 active and 25 non-active, our 25 active ones are on call 24/7. Our 25 non-active have the training and the education and participating meetings, but they come from more of the major disasters because due to their work scheduling or family life or whatever, they can't be on call all the time. I also have one contractor, and he helps me to manage the volunteers. Annual budget is $203,000. It's purely an operational budget. It's salary and benefits for one staff, operational costs to manage our emergency coordination center, some funding for our contractor and the ESS program, as well as training for city staff. And the corporate program, as Karen mentioned, resides in fire, but is truly works with all different divisions in the city.
Chair, there's an acronym up there. Can you unpack
Oh,
ECC?
sorry.
Can you
Yes.
explain what ECC, ESS is?
Yes, emergency coordination, sorry, and we live in a world of acronyms in this field. So ECC is Emergency Coordination Center, and I will talk about that. That's like equivalent of an emergency operations center where we, when we have an incident go on, we activate it and we look to support what's going on in the community. And ESS is Emergency Social Services, and they're our volunteers that it's a provincially funded program. I call them the babies of the province. And we will also talk about that on a slide about exactly what they do. So they're emergency social services. In some ways, I wish they were called something different because I think their roles, I don't think that the description of the job really defines the roles very well. So I went into that. So this is the emergency management cycle. The first two bubbles, the mitigation and preparedness, those are the ones that we as local government really, if we can focus as much as we can, those are some of the areas that we choose to focus on. The National Institute of Building Sciences said for every dollar you put into mitigation and preparedness, you save $6 in recovery. So when you can imagine when you have a big event, the volume of savings you can see by investing in that up front. So the mitigation and preparedness portion of it is identify, prevent, or reduce the risk and impact of a hazard to protect lives, property, and the environment, and to reduce economic and social disruption. And that's a huge thing because when we look back to that Christchurch example, they called it the disaster after the disaster. So the first disaster was the earthquake, and everybody's worlds have changed. The second disaster was the economic downturn. Buildings couldn't get put up fast enough. Businesses couldn't get up and running again. So then you had an economic disaster. Then that turned into a social disaster. So it just it's a domino effect. So the recovery portion, the quicker that you can get the city back up and running to what they call, the new normal is kind of the term that they use now, the better the community will be. Because it's not possible to mitigate completely against every hazard in our community that poses a risk, preparedness measures can help to reduce the impact of the remaining hazards by taking certain actions before emergency occurs. Preparedness includes plans or other preparations to facilitate response and recovery. So, for example, community preparedness is an example of that, which we're always saying to the community, make your kits, make your plan, know what the risks are in the community. So that's making their emergency kits. That's why we're always telling them, make those emergency kits, because that preparedness plan, it helps you with those things that we can't necessarily, we can't stop an earthquake from happening. The goals of mitigation are to protect people and structures, essentially, reduce the costs of response and recovery. So that sums up the mitigation and preparedness. The response portion activate plans to limit the loss of life, minimize suffering, and reduce personal injury and property damage. Response begins when an emergency event is imminent or immediately after the event occurs. It encompasses all activities to save lives and reduce damage from the event. So example, providing emergency system to victims, restoring critical infrastructure. So our public works teams going out and restoring public infrastructure. That's response. Those are the people that are going out there and they're trying to get this community back to normal. Ensuring continuity of critical services so that our law enforcement can continue to do their job, the fire department can continue to do their job, and public works. So putting our preparedness plans in action. So all that practice and all those things that we're doing in advance, that's when we want to try to use them. And then recovery is repairing the community and restoring conditions to an acceptable level, or when feasible, improve them. They say Christchurch, there's always a story that Christchurch has the best 1970s infrastructure in the world now, because part of the recovery portion of it, and even within the province of BC, is you can only put back what you had. They don't pay for, they don't upgrade you from a one car to a Cadillac. It's you get what you have. So they say Christchurch has the best 1970s infrastructure in the world. So part of what our public works teams do is they try to identify and do some of those upgrades where they can, within reason, as they go along. But you can't get everything because, things, when you replace them, they replace them at certain times. Recovery begins at the time of the emergency, and I'm going to show you a slide, and that's very, very important because the success of recovery depends on how quickly it starts when an emergency happens. So those are our 4 bubbles, we call them, our 4 phases. So this is kind of, and actually it was Jake talked to me about this graphic. I had a different one in, but this one is a good one because I think it really visually reflects how things kind of go through the cycle. So on it you have your, I don't know if I have that. You have your business as usual, your business interrupted, and then go back to business as usual. So the first 2 bubbles, your mitigation and preparedness, are on your business as usual. So that's what we're kind of always doing or working to continually do. Then you have your business interruption, which is your event. So something happens, and you can see response is that big red loop there. Response is actually the shortest phase in an emergency. The recovery portion, or the business interruption portion, those take anywhere from months to years. And when we look at the windstorm, we were working on the windstorm recovery, I think, till the end of January. So it happened December 20th. We were still working on cleanup and recovery as of January 20th, and actually are still working on it to try and recoup costs through our finance division. So the recovery portion is your longest phase, and it starts at the time of response. Just make sure I got all my points here. When disaster strikes, day-to-day activities associated with planning, mitigation, and preparedness stop, including activities from previous events, because now you've got to refocus. Life as we know it stops, response starts. Usually response is short duration, high intensity, with initial focus on imminent life safety issues. Recovery needs to begin simultaneously with response, as it is longer. As the longer it is delayed, the longer it will take the community to recover and resume a new normal. In a larger event, it can take years. So basically, we're trying to repair and restore the community back to what we see as being normal. So now we get into the legislation. The city is legally responsible under the BC Emergency Act to have an emergency program. This includes having a hazard risk assessment, which I will talk to you about to show you what our hazards are, identifying what the hazards are in the community, developing a plan, training and public education, and collaboration amongst agencies and external resources. This also includes funding recovery for the disasters up front, so the local government is responsible for funding the emergencies up front. We can look to achieving or securing funding back from the province if it quals, and there's different legislation that we can qualify under, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But we're responsible for our emergencies at the onset. So this is just a summary of the legislation provincially that we fall under. There is a federal legislation, but the Emergency Program Act of 1996 establishes the framework for provincial and local authority emergency programs for declaring a state of emergency, exemptions from civil liability, and how compensation for loss or disaster financial assistance can be received. So that's the first piece of legislation. We have some items under there that give us powers and framework. The Emergency Management Program Regulations establishes a framework for the province. The province is Emergency Management BC, so that's their legislation that says, here's how your framework is going to be, and provincial government response. Compensation and disaster financial assistance, we call it DFA. That's the legislation that allows us, so for example, if we look at the windstorm that we just had, that's where we can try and go and receive response costs back or recovery costs back. And there's certain rules onto what you can claim back, certain percentages that you can claim back. So it's not it's a program that you can apply for, but it takes some time to read through everything and make sure that you've got everything that they need to be able to be successful in securing it. And it's not 100% recovery all the time. It can be 80% on some things can be 100. For example, if you look at staff time, it can be only overtime. They won't pay the base rate back. So there's a lot of different nuances to it, and I rely heavily on our finance department to tell me what that looks like. I'm not an expert in the financial section. And then, of course, there's the Local Authority Emergency Management Regulation, which sets up the framework. So that's our framework document. It's the requirement for locals and plans and the powers and duties of a local authority. And we'll go into a little bit about that, the Local Authority Emergency Management Regulation. So the one that we're kind of, the other ones we obviously are concerned with, but the one that, if you're going to read it, is to look at the Local Authority Emergency Management Regulation. It tasks each local authority with establishing and maintaining an organization, so we have to have an emergency management program. Empowers the local authority to appoint committees and a coordinator, so the me's of the world. Authorizes the local authority to delegate its powers and duties under the Act as required, and it requires the local authority to prepare plans. So basically it kind of sets out, these are the things that you need to do, or we want you to do, to meet the regulations for emergency management within your jurisdiction. So this is a little bit about our ESS, our Emergency Social Services, and I'm gonna, I was hoping to play a video. I don't know if the keyboard's out. Our emergency social services were required to provide assistance to residents that are displaced as a result of emergencies. So this could range from a single-family home structure fire to a mass evacuation. Not everybody qualifies for it. Typically, for single-family home displacement, it's for non-insured individuals. For mass evacuation, there's some legislation or pieces we have to put in place if it's a large geographical one. If it's a tactical evacuation, say done by the fire department or the police department, then we can support that as well, and we have in the past. Our volunteer program, as I said, they're kind of the babies of the province, I call them. They're funded by the province. The cost to the city for this program is basically maintaining and managing the program itself, making sure they're prepared, making sure they're trained, making sure they know what their jobs are and their roles and responsibility. They also, our volunteers run our reception centers. So our 4 reception centers are Bevan Park, Bowen Park, Nanaimo Aquatic Center, and Oliver Woods. We can open more if we have to, but those are our 4 key reception centers. They will not open until those volunteers can get in, get them set up, and have them up and running and ready to accept people. So if we have, for example, a large earthquake event, a seismic event, well, that could take them a couple days to get there. We have to assess the building. We have to make sure the building's safe. We have to make sure we can get the services in. The volunteers have to be able to get there. They're extremely invaluable because they literally run those whole buildings. Richard's staff supports them in their work, and it's just, they're incredible, the volunteers and what they do. The picture here you see, actually, I got to go to the Provincial Operations Center. I worked there for 2 weeks during the fires in the interior 2 years ago. That's the Sandman Center in Kamloops. So that's turned into a group lodging. So it was like that for 5 months. So what you don't see is, so you see all those beds and everything there. On each row circling, you know, the corridors were more beds. So they had sections for families, they had sections for special needs, they had sections for elderly, and then this would be kind of your general population. They had a whole pet center out front, donation management. It's a huge operation, and that center was open for 5 to 6 months, shut down from any other event. It was strictly for group lodging. And the interesting part of that was Kamloops didn't even have the emergency. They didn't have the fires. These were people from the Caribou. They call us host communities now, and we became a host community as well during those fires, where people get spread out all over and they converge into communities, and then these other communities we pick up and help, and we provide them with some of the services the province was offering at the time. I can't show that YouTube video. I don't know if there's a key. Oh, you got in? This is just, it's about 3 minutes, but it really shows what our ESS volunteers do, so. These reception centers are set up by volunteers. A reception center would open up for a variety of reasons. Some could be for a localized emergency, such as a gas leak, where we would have to evacuate a small portion of a neighborhood or a larger portion of a neighborhood. Or it could be for an earthquake. The one thing that our citizens need to remember is that the reception center will not open until such time as the volunteers have it all set up and ready to go.
Does anyone in your county get
No, we're all.
Okay, then we'll get you registered.
Intended purpose of a reception center is for people to come in and register, to get information, and if there is short-term assistance available as a result of the emergency or disaster, this is the location where you can sign up for some of those services.
After a hopefully short period in chairs, we welcome each of the evacuees to come to the registration here, where we capture their name, address, and personal details. We also understand what their needs might be in terms of accommodation, food needs, etc. The process can be quite lengthy. It could take as much as 20 or 30 minutes to capture all that information, because you don't just want to say what's your name, what's your address. It's a personal conversation that people have, so it takes some time.
It flows quite nicely, and our volunteers are very well trained at making sure that you understand where you need to go, what you need to do, and the types of information that they're looking for.
As the registration process is completed, the clerk will raise her hand and a runner will capture that information and take it over to the documentation. We capture the information about dollars allocated for food, clothing, and lodging to support the evacuees, and that information is stored alphabetically.
These are dedicated volunteers who train, learn, practice, and prepare for emergencies that can happen in this community.
This document lays out the details for every single operation that could be staffed during a reception center.
Volunteers step forward for this program because they're able to give back to the community. It's very rewarding. It's a great team. In addition to all the learning and the contributions that they make to the community, they also have a lot of fun doing it.
First aid is certainly a critical aspect of what the support that we can provide. And St. John Ambulance is usually here to help out.
So when you left your house today, did you know to bring your medications with you?
No, I told her to not.
We have a pharmacist arriving tonight and tomorrow. And they'll refill your prescription and get you what you need then. You're very welcome. St. John's Ambulance will be providing triage services at Nanaimo's reception center. And what that means is that we'll be taking people in and assessing what their needs are. These needs can vary from minor things such as a little bit of emotional support or some bottles of water for some heat exhaustion, or something more serious. Maybe someone's diabetes wounds have reopened, or something serious like a broken leg. We'll be able to treat them then with some first aid.
It's not a hospital. It is primarily for first aid. In addition, they will have, in some cases, if they're able to get them here, there will be service dogs. The City of Nanaimo will set up 4 reception centers in a large-scale emergency. The 4 locations that we have designated are Devon Park, Owen Park, Nanaimo Aquatic Center, and Oliver Woods. It can range from the setup of 1 center to all 4 centers to more centers, depending on what is going on. The City of Nanaimo is always looking for more volunteers. Visit the city website, nanaimo.ca, under Emergency Management, and you'll find a link with the information that you need to volunteer for our Emergency Social Services program. I thought that gave a nice summary of kind of what they do, and they're very, very proud of the work that they do. And I'm very proud of them. Like I say, I wouldn't be anywhere without them. They really help a lot. So this is just some of the stats, just so you're aware of what our ESS team, in 2018, they contributed over 678 hours. So they put in a lot of time. We've only captured stats from 1999, but you'll see they respond as well as myself to anything from, we assisted the RCMP with evacuation of the whole BC ferry to wildfire evacuees from the interior. Just in 2018, we helped the Regional District of Nanaimo with their ESS for the windstorm event and closure of Highway 4. And then also we're ongoing assisting some evacuees from Zavalis that there's been a landslide up there, and they've been under a state of emergency since September. So our volunteers are still assisting those people. So we're not, although we are for the city of Nanaimo, we're seeing more and more people using our services from other communities. So the bylaw that we follow, so the emergency program for the city of Nanaimo also has a bylaw 7202. Basically what it does is it sets up the framework. It indicates, in it, it says we're at all times responsible for the general direction and control of the city's response to an emergency. It states we can declare the state of local emergency. So this supports our provincial legislation, implements the city's emergency program, and plans the activation when an emergency exists in the city's jurisdiction, allows us to establish any emergency policy as a result of an emergency event, or enact any legislation to facilitate the response, sets up the structure for our emergency program, appoints an emergency manager for the city through the structure, and it indicates the local authority will ensure that sufficient budget and staff are provided to maintain essential level for the program. So if you go through it, or you have an opportunity to go through it, or to take a brief look at it, it essentially kind of sets up what the emergency program needs to look like and what those powers are through the provincial legislation that you have. So as part of that, we also have to look at the hazards in our community. And so I'm just showing you this one because the next one is a little bit more, the text is quite small. So this kind of gives just a nice layout. So the provincial government of BC has a list of 56 provinces that different communities across BC looks at, and we do what's called a hazard risk assessment. And I'll show you on the matrix what that means. So what we do is we get together, or we did it in 2014, people from other agencies, the private sector, so for example, the Port was there, Island Health was there, all of the different organizations with the community. We take a look and we say, okay, here's the 56 things that the province thinks can happen in the province of British Columbia. What do we think can happen here? And this is the list we came up with. There were 22 different hazards.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Mayor Crowell, I got a question.
Through the chair, just what's the scale? I mean, it says probability 3 in constant.
Yes. And actually what I will do is I will show you. This, I think, will be helpful to answer that question. So on the left, you look at the probability, and on the bottom is the consequence. So when we look at, for example, an earthquake or a seismic event, and I always say the probability of a seismic event, we live in a seismically active zone, it's kind of mid-level, like they're happening all the time, but they're not happening, that we feel them and there's impact to them every day. The consequence on a seismic event is massive. So that's kind of your 4, and let's say a 3 for your probability. But whereas, say, we'll look at a single house fire, for example, the frequency of them is much higher because they happen more frequently in the community, or there's more risk for them happening more frequently. The consequence isn't as significant because it's typically significant for the family, obviously, but it's not affecting a whole community. It's affecting one family. We have the resources that we need, so the consequences aren't as huge. So when we looked at, you saw the 7s that were in that matrix. Those are those top 3 quadrants there, on the high. So right here, 1, 2, and 3. Those are what we consider kind of our highest risk hazards in the community, and I'll tell you what those are because I realize it's very hard to read. And as I said, this was all the agencies and organizations coming together and picking these hazards and saying this. The ones in the middle, you'll see severe weather, drought, flooding. Interestingly enough, we're probably going to have to revisit this and do some shifting with some of the climate change events that we're seeing right now. So that's part of it. You always want to be reevaluating and looking at these all the time. So when we look, I'll give you our top 7.
And this is the Councilor Hammond says.
Yes.
Just quickly, what constitutes a social disturbance in terms of emergency planning?
So for social disturbance, that would be, I guess for lack of better terms, like riots. Oh. So something where you have large mass protests that go beyond the ability of the responders to manage, and it starts maybe moving out into the community, or we may have some communications work that we need to do to get out to the community about what's going on, some support mechanisms to those responders. So that's social disturbance. So quite disruptive. Yes, sorry.
Would something like a tent city fall into that category?
No. 10 City was deemed that was a crisis, obviously. It was a significant issue, but it didn't fall under the legislation for the emergency management. If social disturbance, I guess, and maybe Jake, you can help me, but it'd be more like mass protests down the roads where it's shutting roads down, or the Vancouver hockey riots would probably be your best example of a social disturbance. Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the top example I can think of is a riot like the Stanley Cup riots in our town. If we had something around 10 City for 2 hours, that really didn't go into that realm. It was manageable, but maybe, I don't know if there would ever be a situation where we'd have that much discord in the community, but it could be a trigger. Oh. You've not mentioned the part of the getting a number from the provincial government, and they kind of referee this a little bit. Can you explain that?
The task number, you mean?
Task number, because that's sort of, they would be arbitrating that if it was ambiguous.
Yes, so if we can open an emergency operation or emergency coordination center anytime we want. We can activate our plans anytime we want. But whenever we have a situation that occurs in the community, for example, if we'll use the social disturbance, we feel we have a social disturbance event going on that either is escalating or has the potential to escalate. What we do is we call the province and we ask for what's called a task number. And what they do is they get the information and they kind of do an assessment through Emergency Management BC about, okay, so you have this going on, here's what's going on, why is it going on, how is it going on? And they will issue or not issue us a task number depending on what's going on. All a task number is it doesn't guarantee you anything, it's just a way of them tracking that event at the provincial level. Yeah, it can be for funding if it qualifies for the funding.
But if you don't have a task number,
you can't get funding. That's right. So it's very important. So the first thing, and for example, our ESS volunteers, they won't even deploy unless they have a task number. So there is a little bit of, as Jake mentioned, some oversight at that level. So we have called in the past for task numbers, thinking we thought it qualified for a task number and that, okay, this is starting to get a little more serious, and we may have, but it wasn't on their radar as being something that did qualify. So there is a little bit of a back and forth and some discussions. The City of Nanaimo has an excellent relationship with EMBC and the province, and we are always engaging them in having those discussions, but we can get funding back. So the windstorm event, for example, was under a task number. Through that, the province has declared disaster financial assistance for the city for the Nanaimo area for that windstorm. So using that task number, we can try and get some compensation back for our response and recovery costs. So we will try under the legislation, because the legislation is a little bit tricky, but we'll
They would also shadow our EOC, correct?
Yes, they activate, and we'll go into that whole activation process. So the structure you see here, the BSEMS, we call it, or British Columbia Emergency Management System, everything mirrors everything from the first responders at the site level all the way up to the provincial level. Even our ESS volunteers follow the same structure. So it's very standardized what we do. It's very standardized, and I guess rigid would probably be the best term for it. So our different hazards, our top hazard, believe it or not, in the community is hazmat. Hazmat, our fire department has operational abilities in that they can identify, isolate, and evacuate, but we don't have a technicians team, so we actually can't fix the problem. We have to call teams in to come and fix that problem for the community. They do have, the one thing I have to say with regard to hazmat is it's spillers responsible. So it's happening in our community and we're worried about it. So for an example, if we have a leak of a gas somewhere and we have to evacuate the community, we're concerned about public safety, and that's what our capacity is. The spiller is responsible. They have to have their own plans under the legislation, their own responders under the legislation to basically come in and fix that problem. The second one that we have listed is a marine incident. We just have to look at what happened over the weekend with the Norwegian cruise line. Yes. There's a-
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Sorry, just to clarify, hazmat is the risk that we as a city have identified as the kind of number one that we're going to keep our eye on. And how do you rank those? Because I don't see hazmat anywhere on there.
Yeah, it's here.
I just can't see.
Yeah, the typing's very small. I know. I hate that. Like, I love this chart, but
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. And that's what I'm going through right now is those two top three little corners. Marine incidents, so cruise ship. The jurisdiction for the port, it's not our jurisdiction, but we support them. So, for example, you have a cruise ship that's being evacuated. We would support the Port Authority in supporting the people that are being evacuated, similar to what you saw over the weekend with the Norwegian Cruise Lines, float plane incidents. That was identified as a very high priority for our community. Mass casualty accident was another one that is on the top of our list. Railway crossings, bus transports are weather related, so large accidents. Fire, we just finished our CWPP this year, which is our Canadian Wildfire Protection Plan. And our wildfire risk is considered moderate. We have pockets of areas, though, that are very high concern in the community, and also industrial, like in the Duke Point area industrial. The other thing I was going to say with hazmat is we are a working port, so a lot of the materials that are coming through our port. One of the best things, I think I was jumping for joy when it happened, was when Seaspan built their new facility down at Duke Point, because before it was coming through our downtown core. So now it's nice because it's coming into Duke Point, which is industrial, and going around the city. So there's been some, that's an example of a good effort by company. And I have to say our hazmat companies are very good corporate citizens here. I've had nothing but good experiences with them in all the discussions we've had. And then also with the fire, on that note, as being one of our higher risks, we have a lot of elderly residential nursing homes. So evacuation on those are very challenging, and dealing and managing. They have their own plans in place, but they can be quite challenging to work with. St. John's Ambulance as well, you saw them on that slide. They're also a very integral partner. They're, in addition to being, we have the 4 reception centers. St. John Ambulance is designated as a comfort center as well. We have an arrangement or a partnership agreement with them, and they will also support any special needs evacuees as well. So we have a very close working relationship with St. John. The last thing I will say on this one is, you probably noticed, and this one we were actually, I got invited to a conference in Banff to talk about it. We were the first community in Canada to actually do this. In 2014, the officer in charge, the RCMP police chief at the time, he identified mental health issues in our community, which was very interesting. And the reason he identified them, and we were really nervous about putting it on a hazard assessment, because it didn't really qualify what it was that we were trying to do. So it's a causal factor to man-made risks, is what was being said by the police officer in charge at the time. So basically what he was saying is mental health issues are contributing factors to a high number of incident responses by police, fire, and ambulance on a daily basis. The number of victims in each incident are low, but when combined, the effects are severe. So that was on the RCMP's radar in 2014, and I think they were seeing some of what has transpired over the last few years in all communities coming at that point, because they were seeing themselves going more in the role of dealing with mental health issues. So there was a mass shooting at the time, there was arsons at the time, there was an uptick in severe crime at the time as well. So that's why he identified that and included that so we could keep it on our radar. And unfortunately, Cam's not here today, but I know that they have some programs that they've run at the RCMP to manage some of the mental health issues.
So would that qualify for a task number?
No. It wouldn't qualify for a task number under mental health, no. All that does is it put it on our radar so that we could look to find ways to mitigate or develop plans to respond to it. Yeah, no, it won't. So our next slide. Sorry if I'm taking too long. So as I said, we all work under a standard structure, which is BCEMS, or British Columbia Emergency Management System. So this BSEMS is developed under the authority set out in the Emergency Program Act at the provincial level. It's a standard practice for all government agencies at the provincial level and Crown corporations, and as indicated in the regulation. It's best practice for everyone else, and every community in BC takes this up as best practice, and this is what we do. So as I said, everybody mirrors each other. We're all mirroring one another. So what this structure does is it provides a standardized approach to developing, coordinating, and implementing emergency management programs, establishing guiding principles, processes, and common terminology, and emphasizing integration and partnerships. And that's what we always work to achieve, is the partnerships. And I'll just give you a very, very simple example, real life example of what happened. So I'll go into the next slide. This is where the policy group, that's where mayor and council sits, and I'll explain to you how that works. But it's chain of command. The site is where we see most of our incidents happening in the community, whether it be a fire or a car accident or whatever thing. We have all the resources we need to respond to it. The site support, which is the Emergency Coordination Center, which is where we would activate and where we would see yourself come in, or we'd be starting to have discussions with you, supports the site. And it's very important to remember that we're not running anything, we're supporting. What do you need to be able to be successful to either stop this or to mitigate what's going on at the site level? The provincial regional is at the province, so that's in Victoria, and they help us. The provincial central is the body that is for the whole province and reaches up to the federal government. So I'll use the sandbag example, because this is the best way of looking at this. In 2019? In 2017 or 2016, there was flooding in Comox, Duncan, a First Nation in near Port Alberni and Port Alberni. So what they do is they all got their task numbers, they had an emergency going on in the community, they all ran out of sandbags. So the potential for that is, well, let's call Karen up at the city of Nanaimo and let's get her sandbags. Well, now I've got 5 people calling me saying we need sandbags. How do I decide who gets the sandbags? So how this system works is, instead of calling Karen up, they call the province under their task number and said, we need sandbags. The province looks at it, prioritizes which community needs them the most, makes contact with me and says, can you send 10,000 sandbags to, and it was actually the First Nation near Port Alberni. We said, yes, we can, but we would like some for replacement by next morning because we have some little areas of concern we're watching right now. Deal, we're good to go. We ship our sandbags, our public works guys. We had a member of staff go with the truck because we also good neighbors. We went. We sent them sandbags that night, and this was at 2 a.m. that we got the call. The next morning, the province shipped me 10,000 sandbags back, delivered them to Public Works, and then any of our costs we billed to the province. So that's in the most simplistic form how that system works. So instead of us all calling each other and going, we need, we go to the province helps us manage that, navigate that, and then they work. So anything beyond our city, we go up to the province. So it just kind of goes like this. And then at the very top level, best example was if you needed military. I can't call the military up and say, I need, 200 of your best people here now. I have to call up to the regional, they call up to the PEC, and then it goes up to the feds. So that's the basic way of how it works.
I have a question. I know I'm being too morbid here, but
No.
What is our succession plan for you? 'Cause apparently everybody's calling you, and you're not available.
You'd have to ask Jake that.
Well, I think in fairness, we had, if we're looking at the BSAMs or the CERMS model, there's a lot of training and redundancy built into that because you have 24/7 coverage, so there's all these portfolios, so everybody's got a job to do, and then there's a second and a third tier of people in that role. In terms of coordinating the ongoing preparedness piece, I don't think there's two I see at this stage, but in terms of during the event, the activation of a new ECC or EOC, there is a fair amount of redundancy and cross-training.
Yes.
The whole pilot, I'm not sure if you've got a slide.
Yes,
on
I do.
training.
Yep.
Pretty well any question you're going to have is going to be.
Yeah, hopefully
I
it'll
would say, we all think of emergencies as the sirens going and people are attending to that issue. And we've talked about that graph where actually there's so much of this is getting ready for an event and then dealing with the long legacy of it that's significant. This red area here is your day-to-day, every day there's sirens going, and the vast majority of emergencies are dealt with without any need for additional support somewhere else, but if it exceeds the ability of the first responders to actually deal with it, because the scale has gotten so big. And we could use the windstorm on that Thursday before Christmas as an example. The fire chief called and said, too many streets, too many calls, we need help. And so we activated the EOC. It just kind of brings it up, and that brings a whole team of people into the room to start to assess the situation and start to deal with some of the priorities that you talked about with the province. Because the same thing happens there. Well, that street needs this or that. So it's only when we get to a level where we are exceeding our ability of the first responders to deal with the situation, because there may be multiple sites or something like that we get into the same thing, even internally, correct?
Yeah. We have, I'll go into the chart, I rely heavily on the other departments and that's the support in the EOC. But the province likes a single point of contact as well, right? So it's challenging for sure. So our response goals under BSEMS, and I won't bore you with reading them, but when we make decisions in our Emergency Operations Center, this is essentially how we think. So when everybody comes in for their training, if we have something or a decision we're making about something, are our responders safe? Yes or no? Yes? Okay, next one. Is this going to save lives, this decision? Is it going to reduce suffering? So we kind of go through that. It doesn't mean that everyone will apply to every decision, and it seems like it would take a long time, but with the training, people think about it pretty quickly.
And this is in order of priority.
In order of priority. So it's kind of ingrained in all of our brains once we go through the training. So what is an ECC? This is actually our ECC. You probably see some familiar faces there, John Elliott, and there's a fellow there from Island Health. So our ECC is a designated facility established by an agency or jurisdiction to coordinate the overall agency or jurisdictional response. So ours exists in Fire Station 1. So I always like the best analogy I always say is it's like a mini city. So when you go into that room, by all intensive purposes, it looks like it's just a room with a bunch of chairs. But it has, it's like almost like a little mini city. We've got designated computers with all of our infrastructure backup. It's monitored via security. We've got satellite phones. We've got ham radios. We've got an organization that comes in and operates our ham radios for us. We've got radios. We've got all kinds of computer and software systems to be able to navigate our way through an emergency.
Councillor Martin, yes.
Real quickly, thank you for this. Is there any backup?
Yes.
Being that this is my bailiwick with emergency, as you know, and insurance, right? I know at BCAA, we're all over this with emergency preparedness. And we have pop-up tents that are huge, massive army tents that apparently you can construct in seconds. Mm-hmm. Do we have something similar?
We don't have that. We reach out to the different organizations in the community to get it. And this is part of the challenge when we look at storage of, I get asked, well, do we have blankets? Do we have beds? Do we have this? Do we have that? There's a lot of regulations that go along with maintaining those beds. So we go up to the province to get them.
Yeah, I'm not thinking of that. I'm thinking of the emergency pop-up tents that BCAA would use. We have generators that go with them and all the computers that go with them so that your emergency site still stays active. Mm-hmm. Do we have something so that all our computers and everything you have there, we've got a plan B?
Oh, our secondary location is our Public Works yard. So our secondary emergency operations center is at Public Works, and then our third alternate site is this building is SARC. Okay. So they're not as comprehensive as our primary site, but we have the ability to operate on them and be functional. So it's in our meeting room.
Mr. Chair, I'd just also say that our current fire hall is not seismic at the same standard that we want. So that's a real plug for the new fire hall. That's one of the built-in ingredients with the new facility is to have that security around that room. So that is being built into that fire hall. So that right now it's not a building that would meet any current standard of seismic. So we would probably have to default in the event of an earthquake to another location. As far as having the redundancy to have things stored, we don't have a lot of that type of infrastructure, but we do have a business continuity plan.
Yes.
Which means, if we want to have backups to all our computers and that type of thing, we could talk about that. What is our business continuity plan? And what are the priorities in that? That's a whole other conversation that we could probably have and share with you at some point in time. So it's...
That brought a lot of joy to me that the station is being built, because that's always been a bit of a concern for me, because it's, if we can't activate there, where are we going to go, right? So it's scary for the me's of the world. So our staff, Jake was talking about our staff, we average 2 to 3 exercises per year where we actually practice our plans. We have 80 to 85 staff designated to be in the EOC, and that's for 24/7 coverage. They train through those 2 exercises, and there's also funded provincially. They put courses on that allow city staff to go take courses and further their learning. We do interagency training quite a bit. So examples of people that have come in and trained with us have been Island Health, VIU, BC Hydro, EMBC, the Regional District, and School District 68, to name a few. And then we also have a really unique partnership with Island Radio, so the Jim Pattison Group. This was something years ago where the radio station and I happened to be chatting about communications, and what they've done is we've actually got a radio-to-radio link direct into their station to try and, because that's going to be kind of that first line of offense and getting communications out to the community. And they actually send staff in, they take the reporter half off, and they come in as a community volunteer, and then they have somebody manning a radio at the radio station, and it allows us to get information out fast. Obviously, we got to get them there, and they've got to be able to get there, but it's City of Victoria is also the only, I think it's the only other community that does that. So that's a very good community partnership, and during the windstorm, we reached out to them right on the onset to get the information, to help us push this information out.
Just one question. During the windstorm, and we lost functionality in our water treatment plant, the phone calls that went out, a lot of people were complaining they thought Nigerian were trying to spam them.
Yes.
So have we fixed that portion of it?
We have done we've done the after action report, and it's actually, we're working with IT this year on a replacement for that system. So I know we heard a lot about the challenges of, the Press One, and it doesn't say the City of Nanaimo on it, and so we are looking at a replacement system for that this year. The province has, and there's a lot of confusion between, because the province also has the alerting system that they have where they've tested it. Well, that's strictly for tsunamis at this point, but we don't have access to that alert system. So the local jurisdiction, we still have to have our own alert system. That's only used at the provincial level. They're saying one day we might be able to tap into it, but right now it's strictly for tsunamis. So this is how our emergency coordination, our organization sets up. So where you sit is in the policy group. I have a little arrow there for you. And you're responsible for the overall emergency policy, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what that is. Management, which is our green and red blocks, they're responsible for the management of the Emergency Coordination Center and ensuring that we're supporting the policy direction that the Mayor and Council are giving us. Ops is responsible for coordinating all of the operations within the jurisdiction in support of the response. We're not running the response when we activate our coordination center. We're helping the responders and all the people that are out there doing what they're doing. Planning is responsible for collecting, evaluating, and disseminating the information. Logistics, they go out and they get suppliers, so they may reach out to different businesses and organizations within the community if it's something we don't have within our own organization. And finance and admin, very critical in this, they track everything. So that all comes to that task number that Jake was talking about, and trying to be able to recover or recoup some of our costs after it. So we have designated 3 people per position, and that's for 24/7 coverage. I train approximately 80 of those staff to prepare them for their roles. And then the role of council, as I say, lies within the policy group. There are 3 different types of activations when we activate an emergency coordination center. So small scale is kind of your minor support. You know, might be a multi-agency event going on, and there's a lot possibly going down at the site. So we may do, for example, some communication support on it. A level 2, which is kind of, you're starting to get into a bigger incident. Actually, the windstorm was considered a level 2 activation. Is, okay, there's a lot going on out right there right now, and we need help, and we need to support what's going on out there and try and help them coordinate their efforts. And then level 3, well, that would be when, if we say we're activating to a level 3, it's probably an earthquake, large, or the wildfires in the interior is another example, would be an example of a level 3. This is big, it's long term, we're going to need a lot of help and support on this. Go to the next slide. So this is the policy group. So this is your role. The policy group supports the emergency effort by providing interpretation of existing policies, developing new policies to address emerging situations, and provide continuity of governance throughout the response and recovery effort. The policy group is comprised of the head of the organization, so for us it'd be the mayor or acting mayor, and other senior executives. So Jake would be there guiding and working with you through the policy and what needs to be done. The policy group is the only one that can declare a state of emergency. So if I'm ECC director, or Karen's ECC director, or Jake's, we can't just, we're going to call a state of emergency. We actually have to go through the policy group. Has to be signed off by you, and then we go through to the Attorney General at the provincial government level to sign it off, and we would coordinate that with you through the Emergency Coordination Center. If we had declared a state of emergency and we didn't have the paperwork done, they're not going to say, oh no, you can't declare a state of emergency. They're going to support it, and then we can catch up on the paperwork afterwards. So the policy group responsibilities are policy direction and support. So as I said, advising on existing policies, consulting with our ECC director, keeping apprised as to the status of the emergency, setting expenditure limits. So this is where the ECC director would consult with you and say, you know, this is starting to exceed, the costs are starting to get high. We need to set some expenditure limits, and then we can come back to you should those exceed beyond that, so that you're apprised of what those expenditures are, and we're continually tracking them.
Can I just pop in there?
Yes.
Yeah, just to point clarity, when we're talking in the policy group for signing things like declaration of state of emergency, is that whole council or just the mayor?
It's a good question, and I will get to that. So what that is it is either done by bylaw, which I know is challenging because that would require the whole group. We can do it by order, or you can do it, what was the third one? I have to go to my slide here. By bylaw or resolution, or by order. So when you look at, if the mayor has to do the best that he can to get a quorum. And we'll use the earthquake as the example, right? Because maybe most of you can't get here. So the mayor has the ability to set that order in motion, but there has to be an effort to try and get as many people to go through that. So, yeah. Yeah. The worst.
If I may just pop in?
Yes.
Did we declare a state of emergency for the water plant?
No. Because that was part of recovery efforts.
I don't remember anything, I just got this call.
No, none of the windstorm qualified. It wasn't a state of emergency scenario. We weren't at the point for something like a state of emergency. Is it gives you kind of what they call extraordinary powers, and I'll tell you what those powers are. So you enact a state of an emergency basically to enact those powers under the legislation. That's what a state of emergency is, and we were managing with the resources and managing with what we had and working with the province to get whatever support mechanisms we needed. So a state of emergency, when you start doing that, you're starting to look, we need more powers under a state of emergency. Public information, so we'll use the windstorm, seeing as that's our freshest example. I know that the mayor came in and he did some videos and did a press conference during our windstorm. So all of the communications from the city during an emergency shuts down. All of the communications about that emergency come out from that ECC only. And why we do that is to avoid miscommunication, right? So if we're saying one thing and somebody else is saying another, the public gets very confused. In any emergency, and it will probably for the rest of time be it'll always be true, communications are the most challenging thing in any emergency. Whether it be the message, whether it be how you get them out, there's always challenges with even at the responders level. It's just, it's always the thing that comes up. Recognition, ensuring steps are taken to acknowledge the contributions of response and recovery staff and volunteers, and then ensuring that the after action reports are being done and that we're working on improving our systems, because in emergency management we always seek to, okay, we've had an event, what did we learn from that and how can we improve? So next time, there's always going to be situations that come up, but we try to avoid making those falling into those same areas again, and we can maybe improve our response on the next one. The other thing I beg you to be is to be prepared. Please, 7 days, have an emergency kit. This is something we are constantly trying to educate the public on, is to have that emergency kit. The minimum is 72 hours, but because we're on an island, we're saying 7 days. And we really need you to be prepared for your families and loved ones, because if we need you to help us in managing this, we want you to know that your families are comfortable and safe at home. We always have a family first policy at the city. We need to make sure our families are okay, because when people come in, if they're worried about their families, they're not going to be of any value, and that stands true to our volunteers too. So where do you go? The policy group room. So if we activate you through we have emergency going on, we activate our emergency coordination center, and in talking to Jake, we also brought up a good thing where, you're not going to sit there for endless hours in the policy group waiting for us to communicate to you. If we need you to come in, we'll call you to come in, and there's several ways we can do it. One, we can phone you. Two, we can group text you. We have that in our mass notification system. Three, depending on what type of time frames we're working on, we can email you. We'll let you know what's going on. We provide you with briefings. You've seen briefings in the past where we give you status updates on what's going on, and we'll let you know what we need, when we need you to come in, where you're supposed to meet, what time we're thinking you're supposed to come, or if we need you immediately. So that will be done either through Jake himself, through the ECC director, and we will be working continuously with Jake and making sure that you are informed and advised. So this is a state of emergency. So a state of emergency is a temporary emergency authority measure authorized by the Emergency Program Act. When you initiate a state of emergency, it only is valid for 7 days. So if you need something beyond 7 days, you have to extend it. A local authority would declare a state of emergency when an emergency or disaster is defined within its jurisdiction, requires access to extraordinary powers. And that's what they're looking at. So beyond the powers that you have within your current framework. A declaration is not required to gain liability under the Emergency Act, so we're protected from liability, to issue evacuation alerts, to recover eligible response costs, to qualify for eligible disaster financial assistance. So you don't need a state of emergency to do all those things. A declaration must be made either by bylaw or resolution, and that answers your question if made by a local authority. Assuming time permits, the municipal council can meet to establish a bylaw or resolution that authorizes a declaration of a state of a local emergency. However, an order is the most common mechanism used, since most situations, emergencies are fast. Everything's happening really fast, as you know. An order can be issued by the head of the local authority. In the case of a municipality, the head is the mayor. And the head of the local authority must use best efforts to obtain consent of the other members of the local authority, and must, as soon as possible, convene a meeting of the local authority to assist in directing activities. So examples of powers, I won't go through them all, but you could, under a state of emergency, you can acquire land. You can control or prohibit travel, cause the evacuation of persons, or it supports the evacuation alerts, authorize entry into buildings. So it sounds a bit scary, but those are some of the powers that they give you to help you manage with emergencies, especially kind of in your seismic type things. So those are just examples of Fort McMurray. There's your mass evacuation. I'm sure we all remember that one, and that was just last year in the Soyuz, and actually the flooding that we saw there. So evacuation, you do not have to declare a state of emergency to evacuate people. There's kind of two types of evacuation. There's tactical evacuation, which police and fire typically do, and they're kind of your smaller evacuations. So, might be, 5 to 10 houses around, or, a small neighborhood area. When you start getting into large evacuation, we have to do orders up. So that gives us basically the authority, or we're telling people you need to move now, because now we're starting to get big. There's a whole other host of things that come along with evacuation that come into play. So there's 3 different levels of evacuation. If you have time, it's an alert. We would notify you that we're issuing an alert, and basically we're just saying, okay, residents, heads up, we may be alerting you. There's an order, which is we're saying, we need you to get out now, and on the order it'll say, bring this, and here's where we need you to go. The order is kind of when you're moving people now. And then there's what they call the rescind. So once you've moved people out, you get things kind of somewhat back to normal and people can go back in, you actually have to rescind your alert. You do not have to have a state of emergency to do that. You can go right to order if you have to, because of time. You can go to order, it can be very quick, and you can follow up on your paperwork as well, but we would come for signature from you, and then also we have to go to the province for that signature.
I could ask a question on that specific point. As our population is growing older, and there's a lot of things are happening to keep people in their homes longer. So they're a lot of times they're less mobile. Like I know for sure that my parents in Parksville can't even drive, right? And so if someone, RCMP, walked up the door and says, you've got to leave, they wouldn't be able to. So what sort of plans do we have for folks who are in that position, of which we're going to have more and more as we go forward?
That's always a challenging one, especially when they're in their family homes. In the care facilities, they tend to have their own plans for movement of people as well. But in situations where we have, we'll call them, and I don't want to deem old as being vulnerable, but because there's mobility issues or health issues along with it, we would work to support their movement. So they may not be able to move, but we would say, okay, there's people in this house that can't, and then we would get resources in to help move them. They bring buses in. They bring, if it's some people with special needs, we would bring special needs buses. So we would try to bring the resources in to support the movement of those people. So if they knocked on your family's door, for example, and they said, well, I can't get out, I have mobility issues, we would work to facilitate getting them out of the house into a safe place.
And Councillor Hammonds?
Thank you, and follow up to that. I'm curious if the city does any work with neighborhood associations to support neighborhoods coming together to say, there's an 80-year-old in that house who has mobility issues, there's a single mom with 5 children in that house. Like, are we doing anything to help residents prepare on more of a micro level?
We are. Actually, tomorrow I'm going to Protection Island to talk to their neighborhood group, and this is what we're saying about the neighborhood preparedness plans. The associations are very powerful in delivering those messages. So we've gone and we've talked to people in the Old City Quarter Association, like I've talked to the Departure Bay Association. A community in ours, the challenge with it is there's a lot of people that kind of move in and out, so you're continuously updating. So we're giving them the tools to kind of keep that message going. We're also inviting them to the open house with the fire department. We're going to use that mechanism because I think there's a variety of information booths that are going to happen at that. So we do engage with them. Some are more open to it than others, but the neighborhood programs in urban centers can be a bit challenging just due to the flow of people in and out. They tend to focus on more the individual, but neighborhood associations often facilitate that. Does that help? Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't talk about that one. I won't talk about that. I'm almost done, I promise. So this is our emergency plan. I will send you a copy of this I'll put one in your slot, but it's also on our website. So you know that hazard assessment that I showed you with the matrix? That's how this is laid out. So I just updated it in 2018. So in it, how the city is going to respond to these emergencies if we activate our emergency operations center is by hazard in this book. So it says, here's the things we're going to look at. A plan is a plan. There's no guarantees you're going to be able to work the plan, but it gives us something pre-thinking. So we've already thought about it, and okay, well, this isn't going to work for this. Okay, we might have to do something differently. Also, what I wanted to mention in 2017, and just adding on to what you were saying with your parents, Councillor Bonner, the Disability Alliance in 2017, we worked with, they called the DABC, or Disability Alliance. It was funded by Emergency Management BC. They came in and they worked with myself, and the goal of that was to meet emergency preparedness goal of the provincial government's Accessibility 2024 initiative. So what we did was they basically engaged with us through a consultation and a training process. So I invited all these NGOs and organizations that worked with disabled in an effort to educate, encourage preparedness and planning among them. Because again, that's another, like there's the vulnerable populations is, you know, if somebody often says, well, why can't you just keep track of where everybody lives that's vulnerable? Well, I mean, that's probably a 20-person job trying to do that. So what they did was we met and had all these agencies come in, and then DABC provided us a report with recommendations on our plan. So then as a result of that, we actually met with the Island Deaf and Hard of Hearing Center, and they brought their clients in, and these were people that signed, and had a presentation with them and encouraging them to prepare. And they have now designated Oliver Woods as a signing center for our reception centers. So those are some of those little steps that we're always trying to improve. And that was, to me, was a nice thing to see a positive result come out of something that was concrete. And then what they also did was offer to do signing interpretation for press conferences. So, you know, just little things like that, you know, had I not had the opportunity through a program like that to meet them, we probably never would have achieved that result. So, next is our windstorm, and there's a lovely picture of some of the damage we had. So Laura and I actually are working on submitting a claim to the province. Basically for the response portion and the recovery. So when we talked about DFA, so there's response costs that you can get, and those response costs are covered up to December 31st. And then there's what they call recovery costs, and those costs are under the Disaster Financial Assistance Act, and they are from December 31st to the end of January, I think it is, Laura?
They didn't really have an end date, but that's
kind of where we're going. So right now our estimate, just to give you an idea, that windstorm to date has our costs that we've been able to calculate are approximately $330,000 for, what was it, a 5-hour windstorm. So it goes to show you the significant costs these things can bring. So we're going to work and try and recoup as much of that as we can through the 2 programs with the province. But it's a lot of work. Like there's a lot of paperwork to go through.
Every invoice, every timesheet.
Yeah, everything.
Everything.
Wonder if I may ask, do we have a reserve for that?
So with the new reserve policy, that would be included in the general financial stability reserve. So that's the idea of that, yes.
And that's very important because we are responsible to fund our emergencies up front, and then we try and get the money back. So, yes, and we just finished a comprehensive after action report, and then we will be meeting with the Emergency Planning Committee, which is our senior leadership team, and then we're going to take a look at all those after action items and then say, okay, what can we achieve in 6 months? So the mass notification system is an example that was on there, saying that it was great information, great work, but people were a little bit confused by it. So we need to look at improvements to the system, which it's up for. Then we can look at communications. What could we do to improve communications? And then we've got a series of pub ed things, as I mentioned, Protection Island, visiting them tomorrow. We'll have an open house. And then also another thing that's ongoing right now is a climate resiliency study. And so, as I said, I think we need to probably revisit our HRVA and look at climate as bumping up some of the hazards that even 4 or 5 years ago, really, they're kind of on our radar, but not to the extent after what we've seen this year. and this is the last slide. So I just wanted to go through some of the initiatives to show some of the diversity of kind of what this program does. 2 or 3 years ago, we did the Trans Care event. So that was myself and we had what we called a hazmat committee. It was a group of private sector companies within the community, and they helped the city of Nanaimo host this, and we took first responders through and showed them different vehicles, different dangers to those vehicles, so whether it be trucks. Regional District brought in their buses to show them, first responders, what to do when you arrive to the scene, and this bus is here with LNG. Here's what this placard means. So it was an excellent training opportunity for first responders, and we had police, fire, we had ambulance, and then we also had departments from within outside the Regional District. So the corporate partners helped us with that. About 3 years ago, the province had a huge exercise, earthquake response, and we had city staff go and sit in their emergency operations center and participate in it, and that was a great learning experience for them. As I said, climate resiliency, we had deployments. So for the wildfire, there were many of us, many people went to the myself, I went to Kamloops, some went into the Caribou Regional District. Those are wonderful opportunities for staff because it gives them that real life experience, and they can see the stress levels and the things that communities are dealing with. So it's probably some of the best learning that we could have. We've had the Shake Zone about 3 years ago, and we're trying to get the Shake Zone back now. I don't know if you can see, that was our Shake Zone. So that was the earthquake simulator. We had that up at Woodgrove, and I'm hoping to get it back this year, if not next year, because that's another great opportunity to teach people about preparedness. And we had all the different agencies in there. Business continuity I work on with the city, as Jake was mentioning. This picture down here, we had, they call them emergency management thought leaders. So with the province, we did what was called myself, and we had different partners in the community from Hazmat did mission to task analysis. And these were people from like the Scotland Yard, they came from Israel, they were from everywhere, came to see this study that we did with the province. So they took that, and it was kind of a foundation document for what they saw as setting out emergency planning for cities. It was probably kind of a feather in our cap for the city, and we partnered, the city of Parksville also worked with us on it as well. The other thing I want to note, we have a regional agreement with the Regional District of Nanaimo, Parksville, Qualicum, and the Indigenous peoples in Mid-Central Island. So if we have a regional event, we're able to, like, let's say, for example, we had something going on in the city of Nanaimo and we couldn't get it to any of our EOCs. We have an agreement in place with the Regional District and Parksville and Qualicum, and we can go and use it and also support each other with some resource sharing. So that's in place.
We did that last summer with the fire and the watershed.
Yes.
So we need the EOC over at the Regional District.
Yep. Yeah, I think it was David Miles from our Public Works. So that's a really positive thing, and it shows a nice effort mid-island. We also meet the Mid-Island coordinators, so the MEs of all the different areas, all the way up North Island, we all meet at least quarterly, and we share best practices, and the province comes in and meets on those. So there's a lot of good stuff going on. And as I say, the training is ongoing with our city staff, so we'll be doing probably some sessions in the spring, and then we'll be doing some in the fall as well. And that's it. I told you that was my last slide. It's a lot of information, and as I said, it was typically in a 3-hour presentation, so I'm happy to follow up afterwards.
Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Cities of similar size in the province, pretty much the same sort of staffing involved? In other words, a person and then a bunch of volunteers? Is that sort of the standard?
We're going to get different answers depending on my experience. Yes, this is about it. But the ESS coordinator, I think Karen probably didn't say enough about the importance of that person and how much. I mean, if there's a fire and somebody needs to be displaced, that some things get activated. We could have a bit of conversation around the resourcing around this, because you can find examples where there's more. There was only one in Abbotsford, there was one in Anchorage, which had a combined population of 100,000. with a lot of infrastructure and support. So I'm not saying that's the one answer, but the key is that, I think Karen mentioned, there's somewhere in the 70 to 80 range of people that are trained in this. So work in the preparedness and the leadership that comes from Karen is huge, and it's very important. The actual doing the emergency as first responders is I think so often is important. But then the recovery piece of having people like finance that know how to track this in a paper trail in our system. So again, a lot of this is Karen's leadership and facilitating us through that ongoing process to be as ready as possible. So we're not flying by the seat of our pants. The other thing I'd say is we actually use this model in times when things are not necessarily activated. During the tent city process, we actually set up the EOC or ECC for a couple of months up at the fire hall, and there was a period when we were there daily. And Karen was, because you were the point person on that file, so we used the model in a non-activated mode just to help facilitate conversations and coordinate activities around the city and the other agencies that were involved in it. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, Ms. Lindsay helped coordinate and set up that process. So we used the framework of the ECC to really bring our multi-agencies together. We had representatives from really anybody who was a stakeholder in the tent city, including Island Health, BC Housing, Canadian Mental Health, all of the resources within the city. We did meet regularly, daily, at different periods and times, and that we set up probably 2 months before, 2 to 3 months before the disassembly of the camp.
So the training was very helpful on it was invaluable actually. People knew their jobs and they could sit at the tables and they knew they were at the planning table or whatever. It was really, so we were able to use this we had to use it. Some way to facilitate our conversations and actions, even all the interdepartmental issues that we're going on. So I think it's valuable in many ways.
No, we do that for wildfire, for example. We'll do wildfire planning probably in the next month. So we bring parks, public works, fire, police, and we all get together and we say, okay, let's go through our checklists. Parks, do you have all your signs up? Fire, is they will come and say all their wildfire gear is ready to go. We'll start looking at holiday schedules, who's on holiday, who's not on holiday, so that the structure works quite well. And then we also do severe weather in the winter. We start planning for our severe weather. So there is a little bit in between where we're doing some of that planning for sure.
Okay. See no other questions, and we don't have any recommendations other than for information. I want to thank Ms. Lindsay for her report. Yep. Your enthusiasm makes me feel that we're in good hands.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yes.
Before we move on to the next item, I don't know if I could possibly suggest a recess. I know there's only been 5 of you here until just recently, so you might want a break because you haven't been able to leave the room. So I don't know if you want to call a short recess.
Yes. How about we have just 5 minutes? Is that quick enough for everyone? Okay.
That's right.
We're in recess.
Oh, you got to answer the meeting.
now 7 minutes into our 5-minute break. We're ready to get back to it.
Oh, you're a tough driver there.
And I do have a quorum, so not sure what happened to our 6. So we'll get our meeting started, and we're on item 4B, Governance and Management Excellence. Core Services Review update to be introduced by Sheila Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Rudolph isn't back yet, so I'll try to talk really slow so that maybe he can get back. So this item on your agenda is an update on the Core Services Review that was initiated back in February of 2015 by the previous council. The final report was done by WMC Consultants, and it was completed in May of 2016. Since then, some of the recommendations that was made in that final report have been completed, and I believe I just did a rough count, and it looks as though we have, out of the 74 listed on this spreadsheet, there seems to be 29 that are complete, 11 that are yet to begin, and 34 that are in progress. The last time that this was before council for an update was in October of 2017, so this is long overdue, but this is for council's information and possible further direction. So I'm not sure about the process, if council wanted to take some time to go through. They're not listed in order of complete, in progress, or not yet started. They're just randomly, well, not randomly, they're in order of the actual Core Services Review report. So of the columns listed up there, you'll have at the top is there is the focus area, which is comes right out of the Core Services Review report. The action category, whether it was a council action item or administrative, the recommendation that was in the report, who is now accountable, that has changed. The status, some notes that have been made by staff because with the high staff turnover or the few staff turnover at the senior levels, we've had to kind of reorganize who's in charge of what. So some of the notes reflect where it's been at, because with the new CAO coming in, he also wanted to be brought up to speed as to where this was at, so where we could bring it back to council. And then the final column is the reference to the Core Service Review report. So the full report is available on our website, and the 1C1, 1C2, etc. refers back to that actual part of the report. So if council was to want to reference the full recommendation and what the report had to say, that's the reference number, is the last column. So that is basically what this report is doing in front of you today, and it's council's pleasure what they would like to do. They could receive it for information, they could review it and ask for more information. It's up to council.
Thank you. Councilor Martin.
Thank you. I'm wondering, just unless you have a better idea, having gone through this, was that perhaps, because my understanding was we were reviewing this to see what is still on our plate that we want to go further with, and that's why we're undertaking this review. Is that correct? Can anybody?
Good.
Yeah.
Through the chair, I think this was identified in the fall after council got elected as a topic that staff had identified that needed to be brought forward for information purposes. It's like all these other presentations that we've been giving. You recall only a couple weeks ago we did updated their outstanding resolutions, or actually all the resolutions of the past term. So this is a very similar presentation in terms of the status of the 70 some odd recommendations in the Core Services Review. We're just bringing it here for your information today and seeking, I guess, a bit of direction from council as to what, if anything, you would like to do with the ones. You notice there's 2 or 3 types of categories of information. One is completed, one is in progress, one is not started. There might be a few others in that. So if we're just focusing, I mean, you could talk about, we could investigate or do some staff background on any one of those topics, including the completed ones. And if there's an appetite for more information on any of these, then we'd certainly staff to take that information back to you and provide a little more update in terms of, but this was really the first response to getting this information in front of you, so you could have a bit of a conversation about it, receiving information. You actually didn't ask for it. I think it was noted as an interest area, but it's might be considered somewhat unfinished business, and so you had a conversation and decide how you'd like to respond to or deal with any of the information in here. It's everything from receiver information to direct staff to come back with more information on any of these topics or some other combination. So it's again workshop format. It's there as an information piece. It's your time to have a conversation around the subject matter and provide and determine what course of action, if any, you would like to take on it.
Mayor Pro?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I must admit, if I'm going to start at the bottom, so to speak, and that's the yet to begins,
Yeah.
and just to go through them very quickly, the one that looks like it might actually have value, be important, is the development of new parks and recreation facilities master plan, and that's already in the budget. The other, item 15, conducted operational reviews of each municipal program, beginning with those not in the scope of core review, etc. I honestly don't see much value to that, and I must say that applies, I think, to most of the items that are yet to begin.
Yeah.
If there was a staff person here who can tell me that the city's going to obtain some great operational advantage or achieve some incredible efficiency or save a significant amount of money or enhance the reputation of the city in management circles and municipal governance or anything of that nature, in other words, anything positive about this, those items that aren't yet begun, I don't see any of them as having any significant value. I mean, one of them, for heaven's sakes, was to, item 64, through rationalizing service levels, consider closing Bevan Pool for 3 months. Yet to begin. Well, no progress. Well, thank God for that.
Exactly.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I have no desire to consider closing Bevan Pool for 3 months of the year. Anyone wants to commit political suicide, they're welcome to do so. But for what it's worth, I think in terms of guidance to staff, I mean, those that are yet to begin, apart from the one that's already settled in the 2019-2020 plan, aren't really very worthwhile.
Ms. Curry?
Thank you, Chair. So if, I know the mayor's the first one to speak on this, but there is some options just while the council's going through this that they might want to consider. Council, you could recommend to council that staff not proceed with specific yet to begin items. Some of the blanket, I wouldn't blanket all the yet to begins because there is some that are just carried forward to the next budget cycle, like the one the mayor mentioned as well. There's also the option of you could have staff report back to you on the status of the yet to begins, if there is a few that are just for further budget years. Though on the political items, like you just mentioned, the Bevan Pool closure, it would be nice to have direction from council and not have staff be the one to recommend to council on those items, just as an observation.
Councillor Emmons.
Thank you. I would like to hear from staff on like if we're starting with the yet to begin, I'd like to hear from staff what some of the rationale was to close Bevan Pool for 3 months, for example. But okay, so yeah, obviously. But was there, we don't have enough dollars in this pot, so we're going to do that in order to fund, like, I find this, it's difficult to make decisions. For example, I'll just pull out number 3, articulate the full range of community goals and identify and link the city's program outcomes to these. I don't know what that means.
That's why we're not going to do it.
But I don't want to just throw out everything into me again. You know what I mean? Like, I need a bit of context.
All right, I'll go Ms. Curry and then Councillor Turley.
Thank you again, Chair. Sorry to keep jumping in. Just on Councillor Hammond's points there, I just want to also note, because I didn't in the opening, observing this process through staff going through these action items, because a lot of them fell under the senior management directors, and I wasn't included in them, almost thankfully. So I was more of an administrative neutral looking at this, but a lot of the feedback I heard with this core services review, the consultants did good work, but it was a very surface level review, and so a lot of the recommendations are very high level, and they didn't go deep into these recommendations, really thinking of all of the ramifications and or implications of these recommendations. So it's very high level, and maybe staff that was involved with the consultants would have more to say, but definitely that's an observation that I've heard a lot from staff that were involved in it.
Councilor Turley?
Yes, thank you, Chair. These are probably a couple more questions to staff, but the first one, number 11, asking for develop a clear policy with council on sponsorship, naming and partnering, so that revenues may be increased without cost to residents. Is that something that we already have a policy on, or is that something that we think we should have a policy on? I have to think we should, but...
Just the number of second answer that fits of that conversation. The answer is I think it's not a bad recommendation, to be honest. There's a number of good recommendations in this report, by the way. That's one that I would suggest is valuable. It would be, not to say we don't have some elements of that, but so I think there are at least two other staff that could probably specifically answer questions around how we implement that now, Richard and Laura. There are some of these recommendations is something that staff would suggest we might want to pursue anyway, but again, this is just getting it on the table, having a bit of a round table, and then maybe determining an action plan around this or not. So I suggest Mr. Harding might have an answer as well.
Right, on sponsorship, so we have some minor aspects that council has adopted years ago. There were two other reports that were presented to council over the last 4 years. None of those recommendations were adopted on sponsorship. So we are avoiding if we're looking for major naming sponsorship type of strategy, we don't have that. And it's one-off type of ideas for issues that come forward. And you'll see more of that coming as some of the facilities, their naming rights come up in the next few years. So council will need to deal with that at some point.
And Councilor Turley and then Armstrong.
Yeah, the next one unless yours is on the same topic. Okay. Is number 57.
Can I just ask how we're going through this? Because if we're going to start going through items, like I'm not sure the process. Well, but if we start going around the table, like is that what we're doing? I don't know.
We had it as it's a workshop, so it was kind of like free for all.
Okay. So
as I was sort of seeing. But we'll get some of these questions out of the order, and then maybe we'll come up with something after that.
Okay.
Can I just add on the process a little bit?
Sure.
I think have a little discussion on how we do want to proceed through this. I think would just, looking at how much time are we going to go through item for item of the yet to be determined, and then go on to the things in progress, or have we established this yet? Maybe we should figure out the process.
All right. What does people have to say about that? Councilor Armstrong?
I would like to do how we did the other one and just start with the first page. If anybody has any issues, you call the question, do we have issues with each one? And then we say what it is or isn't. And then make our resolutions to remove it from the core service review, or the recommendation to remove it, or leave it. Because then it's dealt with.
And we'll just call your councilor, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. Just following this, I think maybe then the yet to begins would be the ones that council could look at. And the in progress, after council goes through the yet to begins and makes recommendations or workshops through that, then possibly staff could report back on what comes out of the yet to begins, and also maybe on the in progress. But the ones that are in progress, they're obviously at some stage or another of working towards completion. So I would suggest just going through the yet to begins if you were looking at removing any of these recommendations or asking staff not to proceed.
And the other option would be is we could just, as was suggested earlier, we could say, ask for suggestions from staff at a later date on the yet to begins, on what they think would be the value of them, minus the specific ones the council think. That would be another option. And I think, who was my next list? Councilor.
Thank you. The next one, I have a question, more of a question on.
So just so that we can finish something on process, I think that it is a good idea to do the yet to begins. We go page by page, and then if people have questions on particular yet to begins, they can ask them now. We can have a bit of a discussion and go through them. But there's not a whole ton of them, so I don't think it's going to take up a ridiculous amount of time. And then we can cross that off and then go to the
Second that.
Just yes, Mr. Rudolph missed the first part, but I had done a bit of math, and there's only 11 yet to begins, 29 complete and 34 in progress. So if we're just going to go through the 11 yet to begins, that would give staff some idea and direction. That would be great.
Okay.
I would also like to go through the in progress because I think there's some that could be reviewed.
Your Worship, or Mr. Chair, you could do just yet to begins and then go back and do the in progress and then you can do the completes. Or you could do just this page, the next page, the next page, whichever way. I don't want to get it too complicated, but
Pages easy.
whatever works for you. I think process is probably important, otherwise it's a bit probably hard to follow.
So page by page then?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe that.
So that could be anything on that page, is that the idea? But probably the yet to begins or anything. So why don't you ask the question 3 times? Anything on yet to begins, anything on in progress, anything in complete.
I would actually say if it's completed, it's completed, we should just
Okay,
go on, right?
fine,
So-
that's fair.
All right. So on page 1, numbers 1 through 15, on the yet to be completed, Hemmons and Armstrong.
Number 3, articulate the 4 range of community goals. I'd just like to know more, what are we trying to get to what with this?
Can I answer that?
Go ahead, Councilor.
I think that the real behind that was based on our strategic plan. What does the community want? What are their priorities? And how are we going to link our programs to get there? It's basically what we're already doing with our strategic plans.
Okay, so by my thinking, this, we can remove this.
I agree.
Okay.
Is that a motion?
I move to remove number 3.
Second.
Seconded by people. Seconded by Councilor Armstrong. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Number 3, cross that off your list. Councilor Armstrong.
I think number 7 is very important, and I think when we look at a lot of the others yet to be complete, they all do revolve around facilities master plan. I think that's really important. So I think it's an important thing that has to happen because I'd like to know what is the conditions of our facilities, what are the plans, how do we need to budget for, upcoming improvements, and that would even go as far as to looking at the closure of Benton Pool, that would be part of your facilities master plan. So I think it's really important.
Your Worship, this is scheduled to begin. It's yet not. So it is something that's in the business plan for the Parks and Recreation Department. So we'd recommend it stay.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else on a yet to begin on page 1? Councilor Martin.
Number 15, and it was conduct the operational reviews of each municipal program, et cetera. I don't think this aligns with this current council, and we're already doing operational reviews to a certain degree, so I don't see the necessity of this one staying.
Councilor Armstrong.
I also think that would go in line with the operation that Mr. Rudolph has taken on with Mr. Cup. I think some of that would be addressed by that, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Rudolph.
Okay, the whole operation is continually under review and operation. I mean, it's began with me, and I think those business plans prepared in support of the budget, and we're going to continue to drill down on that and align the work programs with the strategic plan and just good governance procedures. So
It's being done.
Yes.
I would say that it's part of good management. We're doing that, but not in the context of the scope of the core services review. This is more the this is just part of the good governance piece, period. So there is a reference specifically to those, beginning with those not under the scope of the core services review. We're treating all departments equally. In that regard, it's all, every department's being treated equally. So there's no preference being given to the ones that were not subject to the core service review. The ones that were, that's another way of saying new core service review too, which is not the way that it's being approached at this time.
Councillor Hammonds.
I move to remove number 15.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a seconder on the removal of number 15. Discussion?
Is the intent of this to do like a service area review? Like every 1 to 2 years? Or sorry, 1 to 2 of them per year? Is that really what it's after?
Ms. Rudo?
Well, at this stage, through the chair of the council, at the stage we're doing an assessment of the entire organizational structure and identifying what our competencies, bottlenecks, and strengths are. So it's not isolating anything, any department individually at this stage. I guess once we get baselines and get ourselves resourced appropriately and accurately, then I suspect systematic updates to that could take place. But I'm not targeting 2 departments or 3 or 1 at this point in time. It's all departments. And they're not under scrutiny, they're just being, what's the state of the union, what are our challenges, what would be an alignment issue to fix the possible changes that took place without any strategy. It was because budgets were eliminated or people left and the positions weren't filled. So it's that virtually impacts all departments, that situation.
Mr. Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it helps council understand my interpretation of this, there are a number of service areas in the organization, for instance, fleet, that were subject to the core review, and there were a number of service areas that were deliberately left out of the core review. So this, I think, recommendation was to address those service areas that weren't subject to, for instance, sanitary sewer.
Councillor Armstrong? do you have
No,
anything
so I
else?
was just going to say what Mr. Simpson said. Thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor to eliminate number 15. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Mr. Shirley is opposed. Thank you. Councillor Curtin? That's you. There is, so my question here
There's
is...
one more on the
well, there's another one on there. So if we don't address one, is it the intent of council that staff would just come back at a later date with a recommendation of what to do with it? Councillor Armstrong?
I think we should just say that, like, I would like to see the policy, but that would again go to staff capacity, because I do think a sponsorship policy is very important, especially in this day and age. As we get larger projects, we may want to look at naming rights, or like the RDN does with the buses, right? So I think it should stay on there, but I don't think it's a high priority.
Okay, and I'll have Ms. Gurian and Councillor Shirley.
Thank you, Chair. I would suggest that if council doesn't address this today, that staff would proceed and start it as we could going forward. So if it's not removed from the list, if we're talking about number 11, staff would move forward on developing a policy on naming and sponsorships and work towards that goal, as Mr. Harding was saying, as we can.
Councillor Curley.
It's okay, I'm fine with it.
So is there anything else on Ms. Harding?
Just want to take opportunities to talk a little bit on number 12, which is the fees and charges review. So just because I haven't had a chance to actually explain a little bit to council on where we're at with this. So we haven't had an increase in our fees and charges since 2015, and a lot of it was because these processes were underway. So we're definitely behind. So we hope to bring an interim increase report to council next month in finance and audit. It won't though, we haven't had an opportunity to do a complete review of every aspect, but it will be a step review, and in that report we'll talk about other things we need to achieve. But because it's a bylaw, we need to, and we hope to have this in place by September 1st registration for the next year. That's why we need to get it in front of you either next month or the latest in May for consideration. But it won't be, I just want to give a heads up, it won't be a all the things we wanted to typically do in a fees and charges review, but at least work towards getting us back up. We've got 4 years of no increases.
So is that all for page 1? Okay, moving on to page 2. Numbers.
I think you're just back to number 33.
33?
Oh, it's 31.
The very bottom of the page, it's a yet to begin.
It's different on the
It's
print.
actually on 35.
Number 33. Is it
Integrated maintenance. Whatever the number.
It's okay.
Police services?
Yeah,
Yes.
33 services.
Police
So the
33.
next, yeah.
How about we go off my page, which is 16 to 31?
Yes, so that's how it is on the computer.
There is
It's on the screen.
No, I have any progress questions.
So there are no yet to be done there. I do have one question, if I may. 25 and 26, is that a duplicate?
That's what the question is going to be.
No, the bold print's different. That's what the difference is.
Keeping the same number.
Thank you, Chair. I was just trying to get Ms. Mercer's attention. Maybe she could possibly answer that question.
So there's a bunch of policies that kind of sit within policies, so they're somewhat the same, but it's all integrated in the policies that we're going to try to bring forward. So you'll see the same comment about undergoing finance policy review. That's all part and parcel of it. So they're little bits and pieces within policies. So
They're separate.
they're separate, but of similar.
Councilor Hammonds.
A process question.
Again, you guys make it hard.
We're going page by page, I thought we were doing all of the yet to begins.
We were just page by page.
Okay, so then we've completely cleared page 1.
Yes.
No one has any, okay, I have a question. I'm sorry, I thought we were going back.
Page
So in progress, number 5, we're aligning our multi-year budgeting to align with council terms rather than traditional 5-year. Is that,
Well, but the note says to continue under 5-year financial plan.
well, it says it's in progress and then, so we're moving towards a 4-year, but right now we're continuing to operate under 5-year?
I would
Is
say
there something
that
there?
we would not. We would continue with the process that we have, the 5-year.
So why don't we strike that one then? If it's a move it to 5 years, then we're not going to do it.
Councilor Holmes?
I would like more information on that though, because I believe there is a move towards 4-year budgets. So I would like to know what best practices before I strike that. I think that's really important,
So that will come back to us at a later time.
because that would have a tax implication too.
So are we all done with page 1 and 2 now?
Just want to comment on this one about the 4 and 5 years. I think it probably makes more sense to go 5 years, because then at least you have a budget in place for the first year of the new council, as opposed to trying to scramble like we did.
Yeah.
You still have to screen.
Councilor Brown?
We currently do a 5-year budget.
Yeah.
So the note is that we're going to continue on with the same.
Yep.
So it would kind of be Councilor Hammonds that if we're not changing anything, it doesn't, we do a budget and then we do our 5-year budgeting, which does have all the tax numbers in it, and although we change it each year. So what is the point of getting further information on this if it doesn't, we're not going to change anything? We can't go to a 4-year anyways.
Why?
You have to, or so do we not have to do the 5-year?
Yes.
Yeah.
But is that by law? Or is that just a local policy?
No, it's not a local policy. I'm not sure what specific part of the charter that belongs to, but we can bring it back to you and give you all of that, give you a more fulsome review of that.
I'd like that because I did see some communities arguing for the budget cycles in BC. That's why I would like to see that.
As far as I know, it's a 5-year budget, a 5-year plan is what what the standard is, but I don't know, have you, Mr. Rudolph?
I think you'll end up with a 5-year budget cycle, about a 4-year plan, if that makes sense.
That's right.
The other thing I'd say is, within 2 or so months, staff will be coming back with a terms of reference, I guess, for this year's budget cycle. And in that could be a conversation around this longer-term budgeting. But I mean, it's primarily for the first and maybe second year of our budget cycle. But yeah, that's the parameters, the mandate for this year's budget. So you could visit this in the context of all of our budgeting that we're moving forward with as part of this year's budget cycle. So I'd say instead of piecemealing that off, I'd suggest you might want to include that as part of one of your reports that are coming forward on the budget process that would be proposed for next year. So right now we have what we have, but in terms of moving forward, what are we suggesting? I'd say there will be opportunities to visit this subject in the context of some of your future meetings.
And I would say that, in a sense, you have a 5-year plan, but you have 4 years to influence that plan. So there's that, that's already kind of being done as your strategic plan comes up, and you direct us to go in whatever directions are your priorities. So we still have a 5-year plan based on what your priorities are. And then when the next council comes in, those could change or they could stay the same. So we would still do 5 years, but you influence what goes into that 5 years other than the general operating. 4 years. Or 4 years, sorry.
Okay. Councillor Gaspar.
So the question to staff then, why was this recommendation made? Is there any underlying point of efficiency that they're trying to raise, that if we did it somehow differently than we're currently doing now?
I would have to look into that because
Okay.
I can't remember specifically off the top of my head. Yeah.
Okay, because I think that would be the critical piece of information. If it's nothing new or if it's something that we're like, this is ridiculous, let's not pursue it. But we need to know why, the reason behind that. So I don't want to miss out on an opportunity to do something better, but right now I'm not hearing that there's anything that this thing's on.
Councillor
I think one of the reasons was that way for exactly what Ms. Mercer said, because we are only in a 4-year term, so it doesn't leave a new council with a plan. If they may not agree with it, they have to go and scrap it and change. That's my understanding, but I could be wrong when I read the report. That's because then we approve a plan for year 5, we don't get reelected. Similar to this council, we'd scrapped a whole bunch of stuff, so then all that work that was done by staff is now out the window. I believe that was one of the reasons.
Councillor Brown.
But every year, no matter what year we are in our term, we will adopt the next year budget and the 5-year. We will do that regardless of this 4-year, whatever this looks like. Just putting that in there.
I tend to agree, Mr. Chair, and on top of that, you've got a longer-term capital plan, which is even longer than that. It's a rolling document that gets reviewed and refreshed every year, so I think it's a bit of an academic conversation in a sense. You're certainly going to have complete control over the budget process for 4 years as an entity. But as a matter of practice, 5 years, 10 years for capital and so on is normal. But you could shorten that if you wish. I guess it's now we're talking about how are you going to handle the last part of the mandate. So it's a bit of an abstract conversation, a little bit. I don't know of any benefits between a 4 to 5 other than it sounds neater and tidier, but the reality is there's still a budget for the new council they have to work their way into, and they'll be in complete control of changing that in 2022 when they come in. So I don't know if you're hurting or helping. It's just a number right now.
Okay. So I think we have 2 issues here. We either scrap it or we get a report from finance about what it means. Right now, just Councillor Emmons.
I would move to strike it.
Seconded by Mayor Rowe.
We only have one mayor.
Okay, talk this one to death. All in favor? Opposed? We recognize that Councillor Armstrong is opposed. Thank you. Page 3, I believe.
We're on the second page.
Councillor Emmons.
Number 17, we have we're looking at alternative methods for establishing management wage increases, job evaluation, et cetera, but we're only focusing it on bylaw. Why?
That's how we get their money, through bylaw.
Sorry, can you explain that differently?
Well, because that's through bylaws how they get paid. Like it's their, like, it's our bylaw 7,000, it gets in their wages, all that kind of stuff.
Not the bylaw.
Oh, so we're not looking, okay, I thought this was only the bylaw department. Thank you.
No.
Thank you very much. That's it for page 2.
Page 3.
Okay, page 3, numbers 32 through 43. Yes, Councillor Harmon.
Yeah, number 33, which is yet to begin. I'm needing some more information on understanding this through the chair too.
Councillor Armstrong, would you like to answer that?
I can answer that too. Part of the issue is if the facility maintenance unit in the RCP detachment are sick or whatever, there's nobody that can come in and clean because they need a security clearance. So I think the move was to get the all facility maintenance staff to have a security clearance so that they could, if there was an issue that they didn't have cleaning or whatever, they could bring somebody else in.
Oh, okay. And
Because that has happened in the past.
we're still yet to begin on this one. What, it would seem that that would be fairly easy to do.
Well, we're going to go find out right now. It's Friday.
I think through the chair. So this also includes the maintenance of the building inside. Currently, we have a lot of contractors, and I think as part of the larger facility maintenance program that the Parks, Recreation, and Culture is, I think it ties in through that quite easily as well. And some of Mr. Hart's group are currently in the process of going through police security clearance checks, just so they can go in and do assessments on the building, if that's correct. So it's not just about the cleaning of the buildings, though that is an issue, but it also includes the maintenance, lights and everything else, not just general.
So if I may, so really it's kind of in progress more than yet to begin, or?
It's barely.
I think some of the more technical and some of the consultants or contractors that are in there on a regular basis, the issue of having every custodial person cleared for their those
Oh, okay.
I don't believe that is going to be capable, just because of the security of that building. But definitely in the other parts of it, we're looking at ways of ensuring that
Mr. Chair, I think this is an example of what I find very piecemeal kind of recommendation. It's not really, what they should have done is recommended that the facilities management system for the city be coordinated and as opposed to managed in a decentralized manner. That would have made more sense in a core service review. It's very much a cherry-picked kind of comment. I don't really see the value in it. I think it's part of a bigger conversation, which is certainly under review right now, is to ensure that our facilities management system, right from who looks after the roof repairs to the janitorial, is being done properly. If this is about security clearance, that's one thing, but this is in terms of facilities management. I think that's one of the issues that's under review. As an example, can we do this more efficiently by coordinating activities between different departments? There's 2 or 3 different departments that look after facilities management. For example, Dale's group looks after this building. Richard's people look after the Parks and Rec buildings and others. So this probably has merit in terms of, but a broader conversation would have been probably more useful in a core service review, it strikes me. So I just find it a bit odd.
Councillor Armstrong.
I would think that a lot of this would be done under your facilities master plan, wouldn't it not be? Like, I think a lot of that would fall under that. So I think that a lot of this stuff is redundant because I'm sure when you're doing your plan, you're going to be looking at that. Could you, integrate it better than it is? So like, I do think a lot of this stuff is redundant, that one master facilities plan will address a lot of these issues.
Maybe if there was a motion, you could be refer this and make sure that this, if you want, I don't know if there's any benefit of doing it other than it could be referred into the facilities review process and keep it on the books already. It's going to be looked at anyway, so.
Councillor Tootin.
Mr. Hardy, comment.
I just want to add to, since this has been done, we've also made a lot of headway in asset management. So preventive maintenance, and I think some of the frustration maybe years ago when this was being done was ensuring that the asset was maintained. So that kind of work has progressed significantly. So some of these things again are either redundant or can be incorporated into to a broader facility plan.
So keep, report, or refer?
I'm going to make a motion to take it off because it sounds like it's redundant. Things are already happening anyway, so I say I'm making a motion to remove it.
Seconded by Mr. Turtle, Council Turtle.
I know you respect
The old guy at the end.
That's the floor. That's the truth.
Okay, we have motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, so hand up first.
I would like to remove number 40, which is, I have a question on this, which is yet to begin. We're on that page.
Yeah, nothing there.
My question on that is when we're talking about service levels, is that what you're doing with Mr. Cuff? Are we talking about like assessments, like, you know, like we should be, I think we should be having, people should be giving assessments, you know, whether they're 360s, is that what that's referring to? Or is it just, I don't understand what it is.
Ms. Curry?
Thank you, Chair. So I just actually brought up the core services review because that last column does reference what part, because I noticed this one coming up and I didn't understand what it was either. So it says, establish priorities so that measures are first developed for outcomes and service levels for all programs, a top-down process, and that these are reported annually to council and the public. Following this, more detailed measures supporting governance and senior management roles should be developed. So still not that clear to me.
Well, I can talk to this. I'm speaking, I don't need a core service review to speak to it. This is normal, that there should be probably performance metrics for the organization. It would be something that we would build into our business plans. That would just, the framework for the business plans, that's another layer that can start to be built into there. What's an acceptable turnaround time for building permits or number of widgets you process, all those are kind of normal. It's just going to take us a little while to get there as a system across the board. It's not outputs and how many kilometers of street sweepings we did last year. I would ask, well, how many should we have done? It's not how many we did. So it's, I think the idea is right, it's normal, but we need to work towards getting there in terms of our performance at this stage. I don't have a baseline to work from in our organization. So it's not included as part of the org review at this stage. It's more of a framework document, the bones of the organization. This will be a performance of the organization. How efficient are we and effective at doing what we would like to do?
Councillor Gusbrook.
Through the chair, so we currently, say for example, don't have performance measurements for turnaround times on building permits or...
We do, actually, on that one we actually do. Whether we're hitting it might be a different story. Yeah, we could, as an example, talk to that. Yeah, it's not that we don't they exist, but having a corporate system where we're documenting, and I don't think we could say we certainly don't have that.
Yeah, we do. I know Mr. Lindsay brings reports forward. I'm not sure how frequently, but to council on development targets and timelines and major projects and sort of where we're at. So we do have benchmarks. I call them benchmarks or targets with development approvals processing, building permits, subdivisions, development permits.
And I've asked Mr. Lindsay to go over that a little bit as part of his Planning 101 session on April 8th. So they're starting at a high level, but we can get down to turnaround times. And the aspirational ones versus the actual ones might be different. So, but as a corporate issue, I think it's a good idea to have some indicators of performance, not only outputs, but we want to get minutes turned around in 20 days. Are we doing that, or what's the number, and how are we working towards that? More like a business.
Just to follow up on that, I think that's critical to have those and have the actual, corporate machinery to feedback loops that if we're not meeting those targets to have some sort of force.
I think this is going to be a multi-year process to get us to a place where we're doing all those things properly and well. Just right now, still very much at the fundamental stage of assessment and building, and so it's not strictly part of the review that we're doing at this stage to right-size our organization.
Councillor Armstrong?
I think we should just leave it there then and let our staff develop that, because I agree with Councillor Geselbrecht. It's critical to know where we're at. And I think that will also help us later for staffing levels. If we find out that, we're like a year behind, maybe it's because it's a staffing level, so that will help us. So I think service levels are critical, and I think it should be.
I wasn't sure that was a motion.
I'll make a motion to leave it.
Thank you, Chair. I don't believe there's a motion required because I think we decided if we just leave it, then we're just going to proceed.
Okay, then.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you. I agree with the assessment of 40, as long as staff are really clear about what that is and the information that you would like in order to do a good job of running the city and how this speaks to that. So I'm behind that. As it's currently written, I don't think it's very clear, but if staff understand and interpret it in the way we want them to.
At this stage, for me, Your Worship, I've not been using the core service review as the Bible. I've been using good management practices and your strategic plan as the governing document that we will work under. Not so much, that's a philosophical comment, I think. It's not the document that we're aspiring to this point in time, working to complete because it was in the core review. If it's in progress, it's in progress. Might have been in progress anyway. Hope that's not a controversial comment, but that was certainly, I'm trying to align us with the strategic plan and just getting ourselves the best practices as opposed to necessarily trying to follow every one of the recommendations in this report.
Councillor Hammonds and Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that, and that actually wasn't my question. Mine is related to number 39. I simply don't understand it. We've got defined performance measures, 5 recommendations, and we have 4 bullet points that don't seem to be performance measures. So if someone could just explain what that one is.
It's in progress.
Ms. Drury.
I might be able to, just give me one moment. 39 in progress. I'm just looking it up.
You have to go to that, yeah.
So it's back to actually what Mr. Rudolph was talking about, I believe. Number 39 is saying that it is 8A1. So when I look at the core service review under 8A1, it says report existing service level targets, identifying the source of each and reporting performance against these. So the 4 that are listed under here are establish and track outcomes, service levels, performance measures for building permits, inspections, etc., subdivision, parks and fleet, and adopt council-approved targets for key outcomes and activities. So still not very clear, but then there's more on the other page. So I think it's along the same lines. I think if it says that it's in progress, that, like Mr. Rudolph was saying, it's best practice stuff that we're doing anyways, regardless of this core services review report. It's just under his leadership and direction and trying to find efficiencies and management excellence. We're continuing to do these things, so
if I may, if doing this is part of good management that we're doing already, then great, I'm happy to have it in. But just for my own process, this didn't make sense, so I just needed to ask the question. But if it makes sense to staff who are doing the work, and it seems to be in line with where we're going, I'm fine with it.
Councillor Armstrong.
I think it's critical. Again, I think we need to have priorities and measures and targets. I think it's critical for everybody to know what we expect or what's expected of them, because there's nothing worse than not knowing what you want from them. So I think we need that. I think under, as has been stated, I think Mr. Rudolph's got a really good grasp of that and he's doing that. But I still think it's an important thing that needs to be tracked, if that makes sense.
Councillor Brown.
I think we saw some evidence of a shift towards KPI or performance indicators in this year's sort of business plan that are typically weren't there in the previous city business plan. So I think there is some confidence that we are going in that direction. It is a huge undertaking to develop meaningful performance indicators. So I would expect that to be a multi-year process that evolves over the years to come.
So that's a leave. Okay. Anything else on to be or in progress or to be yet to be done? Hearing none, I'm moving to page, I lost it now.
36.
Number
44 now.
4, I think.
44 to 57.
Yeah.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you. Mr. Bonner,
Sir, you.
Yeah. Number 57, I'm just trying to figure out what this is all about. And this is, I guess, are we doing police work that is actual provincial or federal involvement? And if that's so, is this just a request that we get paid for it?
Sorry, what number?
It's the last one.
57.
It's 57 to do with the non-municipal.
Ms. Mercer.
So we have, in the police building, we have our CMP members and we have city staff. And so we, each year, we calculate out a portion of the maintenance of that building, and we bill the RCMP for that. Right now, it's based on number of members, and number of people in the building, and their percentage of that. So that's what that relates to. A couple of, maybe yet to begin is not quite accurate. A couple of years ago, we had to revamp our bill to them, and we necessarily negotiate, but we agreed upon a ratio to charge the costs out. And I also know that real estate was under negotiation for an agreement with the RCMP for that building again, and I'm not quite sure where they're at with that.
Strictly to do with
maintenance.
Ms. Fry.
And through the chair, just following up on what Mercer said, as an example, we have the RCMP detachment, out of the detachment, we have RDN police officers that go into Cedar, for example, or into Lansville. And if we host some of the prisoners, that's our municipal staff that are looking after those prisoners. So it's about probably trying to relook at some of those fees and making sure that that accuracy is correct. That then the dollars that they give us is based on their federal law or provincial law, and not the actual cost, from my understanding.
I think what they're also referring to, if you actually look at the report, is the fact that we have 2 First Nations members here that are not paid for by municipalities. They have 7, but we actually have 9, and 2 public servants. And if we build for the support that they give them, we would need to have an increase of $240,000 annually coming back to us. Because right now, those areas are benefiting from the municipality paying for everything. So I think it's a cost, that they want a cost-sharing model. And right now, the federal government doesn't pay anything for the 2 First Nations members to sit in our building. So I think that's part of it as well.
That's all part and parcel of that ratio that we charge out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say, Your Worship, it probably should have been in progress or ongoing would be a better label than yet to begin.
I wanted to also recognize that the city manager is calling me his worship.
Sister Honor, go to your head, clearly.
Councilor Evans.
Thank you. Just a note, number 44, I just found it interesting, the specificity of explore opportunities to attract the Y to Nanaimo. Again, that seems like a bit of it. That's not really a kind of strategic thing. That's a specific entity. So really like what I see, what staff are doing, and this is in progress, and we know that we have some exciting movement with partnerships, et cetera. But just wanted to flag that as that's an odd, for me, that's an odd recommendation. And we'll never meet it, I don't think, unless we go up to Y tomorrow.
It's possible that through the updated Parks and Rec master plan, there might be the desire to do partnerships and seek out those types of arrangements. I would defer that recommendation to the process that's underway because it's not an active initiative at this time.
Councilor Cuthbert.
Through Chair Bonner. Number 52, consider not renewing the assistance given to the Island Corridor Rail Foundation in light of the RDN decision to cease funding this organization. Where do we sit on this?
Good point.
Number again?
52.
I had that one flagged as well, because my question was, how does the letter that we've done affect that?
Would that be the rail crossings on the roads?
We give them a tax break on the property that they have.
Okay. Commission tax exemption.
And they also have
And that's still in place?
revitalization tax exemption.
But we pay a fair bit.
And that's in place for a few
Yeah.
more years.
And so we still pay to do those rail
Pays
crossings?
quite substantially for rail crossing agreements. One of the pieces that we were hoping to chat about during our transportation day in a month or so is around the constraints that the railway puts on our transportation network for crossings, for grade adjustments and so on and so forth. It's fairly tight.
Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Chair. So in the actual report itself, it says exactly what it says on the spreadsheet, and then it says to refer to page 104, which says that in 2015, a PTE RTE of $121,000 was given to the Island Corridor Rail Foundation, an organization that the RDN decided not to continue funding in 2016. So the recommendation is to consider not renewing it. So that's exactly what the report says.
Councilor Regasso?
I know a large part of the reasoning behind not supporting them was given the current, the past executive director, and it was a very closed operation that seemingly didn't look like it was moving anything forward, and I know that there has been a change of direction. And we have had conversations in supporting this idea of maintaining the corridor and pursuing potential opportunities with the rail, and so I personally feel that we should scrap that consideration.
Councilor Brown?
I think it's just even simpler than that. If we did not grant the exemption, at some point we would have to pay for it because we are the body that ultimately was providing grant money through the regional district for the corridor. So I think it's probably wrapped up in a much bigger conversation around just this one particular item. It's wrapped up around what is the intention towards, as the whole entire picture towards the corridor. So I think, to be clear, I think it would be very premature to start picking apart some of these recommendations around the corridor when we haven't even had probably a much larger discussion around the corridor.
So you suggested leaving it?
Well, all it says is consider.
Right.
So it's not something that's demanding action.
Okay.
All right. Councilor Hammond?
Thank you. Number 48, the staff direction is this information is included in the annual grant summary, so is that essentially saying we don't need to do this? Therefore we can strike it?
Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up here. We do, every year we do a full report on cash grants, permissive tax exemptions, revitalization tax exemptions, as a summary, and shows each organization what they get.
Right. Which is essentially this recommendation, right?
That's how I would read it, but I'd have to go into if there was more detail on that one, if they were looking for more.
Okay, if no one else flagged it, I'm happy to leave it. It seemed like we have a recommendation and staff saying, yeah, we do that.
Yeah.
That's how it reads to me, yeah.
Councilor Thorpe's not here to correct me on this one, but is it true that once we grant a permissive tax exemption to an organization for the entire property, that property no longer increases in assessment value? The BC assessment just takes it as it is right then and there, and does good, or do they actually do increases it?
Yeah, so there is no cap or maximum on the property. It changes year to year, or it can. Yeah.
And so so this money that you're saying in this report, it's recognized as the value of that property at that time?
Yeah. So when we do the 2018 report for you, it will be the value of the 2018 assessment value. So it'll be a current value.
Councilor Armstrong?
A pretty good question, because I remember we got an email on one of the businesses that kept the PT. Is it go to the business or does it go to the property?
It goes with the property.
Yeah, so that if there's a nonprofit in there, they get their PT. And if they sell it to somebody that is a for-profit, it still remains that until we're notified? Because there was an issue with that came forward to us.
Yeah, sometimes BC assessment will miss catching that. And we have a conversation back and forth. We are looking at those when we do our bylaw every year, but if something happens between the time of bylaw and taxation, the person or business that comes into that property gets the benefit of no taxes for a portion of it.
And you can't go back after it? Is there a way that we can change that, or is that by provincial law? Because I think it's ridiculous.
If we catch it by, I think if we have that conversation with BC Assessment before the mid-February, there we could get a change made, but after that, it's, they
I'm
have
sure it's
their-
not that frequent either, but
Yeah, no.
thank you.
Councillor Gaspar.
Just further on that thought, I know that creates an issue for nonprofits that move halfway through the year, and it's a private company that moves into their business, gets a tax exemption, and then they get hit paying taxes on the property they're in. And I'm curious if there's any way that we can address that subtlety.
We do have a cash grant, so it's not very often used, but for circumstances like that, and you will probably be having one at your next finance and audit committee, that if they come in after we've done our bylaw, and so they miss the chance to be tax exempt in the following year, there is an opportunity for them to ask for a PTE cash grant.
Councillor Armstrong.
Now, is it possible though that we could change it so that the actual PTE goes to the nonprofit, not the property? So would that be something we can maybe advocate at the UBCM? So that's something for a later discussion. I'll leave that for now. Thank you.
Is there anything else? Yes, Councillor
Number
Burton.
45. It's to do with the NEDC, review the NEDC grant in the context of updated strategic plan for the city.
46.
Is it 46? Oh, you're right, I'm sorry. I need new glasses. And in relation to comparable municipalities, it's in progress now. My understanding was the NEDC was abolished, so is that something that is still being worked on, or is that?
It's a moot.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
It's moved.
We need a motion to remove it.
I'll move.
Thanks.
It wouldn't hurt, so that would be good. If there's a
Seconded
motion to
by
remove it.
Councillor Brown, motion by Councillor Turlick to remove 46. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Besselbach, are you opposed?
No, I'm in favor, but it's slow.
Okay, all right.
Which is unusual. You're normally the first one.
All right, thank you. That passed. Anything else on this page? Moving.
I missed that.
Let's get it personal here. Moving to 58 to 66. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Mayor Bonner. Acting
It's a long list of titles today. They're all correct, sort of.
Number 64. I personally could never view shutting down Bell and Pool for 3 months out of the year. So I would like to move that we remove that.
Second.
Councillor, did you have any
I'm
questions?
just ready to get rid of this one.
Okay. Right, we have motion by Councillor Martin to remove number
64.
64, second by Councillor Armstrong. Discussion?
Can I ask Mr. Harding, was there a reason that you would recommend that we close that? Or if you're not comfortable answering, that's fine.
No, I think what the consultants were providing council was they wanted to come back with something that would show some reductions in operating costs. And that was one that they came up with costs, because we close it once or at least a monthly a year for maintenance, and it's also a slow period of time. So what if you added 2 more months, you could save some more money. It wasn't something that staff recommended.
And in your opinion, there'd be a lot of public pushback against that, right? Because there already is. Perfect. Yeah, that's what I thought.
There is over 1 month.
That's what I mean, that's what I wanted to clarify.
If I could also just use this, every year we get more and more use of our facilities, so as the community grows. So, I mean, 10 years ago, you may have had this different discussion on this, but now
This is 5 years old. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's passed. Thank you. Anything else on that page? Yes, Councillor Armstrong.
Number 61, and I think we can get rid of that because I think that's already part of the facilities master plan. So I'd like to remove that because I believe Mr. Hardy would be looking at the space permits when he does his facility master plan.
Second.
This is number 61.
Yeah.
Any discussion? Councillor
So I want to make sure that we're not talking about two different things here, because there's a facilities master plan, but I thought there was also Parks and Rec facilities master plan, or are there two different things?
They will, if I could, they'll be meshed together. There's a number of facility issues overall for the city. Of course, there's a lot of cultural, recreational, there's also administrative, operational things. So we hope to incorporate as much of those together as we can.
In one time.
Question?
Just for Mrs. Sims, did you want to talk on this part or something else differently? Okay, I will call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? Passed. Mr. Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 62, I'd ask council to consider that one. Just on, I believe the background of that was an opportunity to again, as Mr. Harding said, come back with some cost reductions on the core review and some value. There's studies going on right now and looking at the space needs at the public works facility and incorporating the potential to incorporate Parks and Rec. But I think this particular recommendation was that the city could make a little bit of money selling Prudhoe, but sort of neglected to talk about the fact that we need to spend $15 million at renovating the public works yard to accommodate that. So it's just, I ask that council consider this one.
Move to strike. Okay, moved and seconded by Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Mr. Chair, there's another one in the same vein. Now staff are at racing points, but because you dealt with
I was going to have some.
64, I think you probably should have a conversation about 63.
That was my question. Does that not fall under the facilities master plan once
I think
again?
it does,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
So I would like to remove that because it will be addressed by the facilities master plan.
Okay, motion by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. Ms. Harden?
Just want to make sure the council has background. This building we did initially actually have funds in to rebuild that building a number of years ago. And it was put on hold for this and some other things. I can't sugarcoat it at all. That building is very old and it needs either a major rebuild or enhancement or something. So we won't be able to delay this as some other buildings that much longer.
Councillor Armstrong?
So if I direct this to Mr. Hardy or Mr. Ruda. So when you do that, you would be making a recommendation, like maybe facilities master plan, that we need to deal with the parts we've had first. Is that correct? Or it might even come up sooner?
I think there's a facility, through the chair, there's a facilities review that's going to inventory the status of all the buildings. This was taking another step forward and saying, close it and don't build again. That was sort of the inference with this. And I think it's premature to make that decision at this stage. Certainly, building is past its useful lifespan. But this is sort of suggesting, the way I read it, is that it should be closed, period, not reopened and So I think that would be a different conversation for this council to have. If that was your pleasure, fine. I don't think you've had that. So the way it's reading now is that it's still on the books. It would suggest that you still support that policy. And I think it should be looked at in the context of the facilities review before we make any decision around the status of that building. And perhaps Mr. Harding will come by sometime not too distant future and say, look, I can't wait for that facility review to be finished. We're going to have to make some decisions here. So I think there's a bit of a bigger picture there. The inference is if you did the 64, I suspect that you probably want to have a decision around 63 on this list as well.
So we already have a motion on the floor, I think?
Yes.
To strike? Any further conversation? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
So that was striking 63 or 64.
Oh, we already did it.
Can I just ask a question?
No.
Sure. No, yes, no?
Yep, sorry.
Yeah.
Already, yeah. 64 is not due.
The Departure Bay Activity Center is the one that's like across the road from Americo's?
Yes.
That's correct. Okay, do people, is it being used by groups right now?
It is, you have one of the big users back there with the ham radio operators are very active users, so that's one of the reasons here. So it is well used, and I would say it's one of those, it goes back to a lot of these are amalgamation buildings in the 75, so it's that building, Harrod Activity Center, Chase River Activity Center, all those buildings are getting way past their lifespan. We need to deal with either seismically or functionally, structurally. So we'll need to make some decisions on them.
Yep, great. We're about to move on to the next page.
No, I would like to remove 66 because it's in direct conflict, as it stated from what the KPG said. This is asking to increase our usage of P cards, which we found was not a good thing. So I would like to remove that and leave that with the financial people that have already worked on that. Because I think when we do our financial, like the new SAP, that will be addressed, correct?
This is kind of, one report said, if for small dollar purchases, use your P card. And KPMG was saying there's less control on P cards. As the accounting group, we tend to lean towards, we found a balance between when you use your card and when you, at what level. So we don't actively encourage people to go out and use their card.
Second.
So that was a motion to remove.
Yeah, motion to remove it.
Seconded by Councillor Brown. Councillor Brown?
I think council is probably at a comfort level with some of this P card discussion. There are issues around P card use, was greatly exaggerated, and they are being used appropriately, and we are making sure all our purchases are done properly and appropriately. So just cleaning that up even further, I don't think there's any harm.
I just want to stress too that there wasn't an abuse of P cards, as was people were led to believe. There was a couple, and one that was talked about had been addressed. And I would like to congratulate our financial staff because I do think the policies were good and they're being followed. It's when they weren't being followed that we had issues. So I think it's really important that the public understands it wasn't the big abuse that was out there.
Anybody else? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
What was that?
That's a big word.
Say that again. There is.
We're moving on to the last page, which is items 67 to 74.
There's only two that are not complete, and the other two are in progress.
Good. Go out on a small whimper. Councillor Jasper.
No, I just have a question. So the core services review, we're still using this as a management tool to track certain tasks?
The core services review?
Yeah, this document, like how does it fit in?
Well, I think, no, we're not necessarily using it as a tracking tool. I think previous administration probably did, but we're using it as an information item to track the status of projects that were initiated as a result of this. And this document, I think, represents the priorities of the council of the day, and it was intended to address those concerns under the mandate that it was given. I'm assuming that's a fair comment for opportunities for fiscal austerity and so on. So I wouldn't want to criticize it. I think they were fulfilling the mandate that they were given. Having said that, there was an absence of a list of services in the report. It's sort of a bit of big picture and very specific issues, and it's not easy to follow in the new construct of what we're trying to do now, to be honest, where we're trying to take the big picture and line everything up so you get strategic plan, business plans, personal action plans at the staff level. And so it's a piece of information, and all those projects that are in progress will continue to be in progress, and we can report out to you in our business plans as part of the business planning and budget cycle that comes on an annual basis. And if you would like to use this as part of your guiding documentation to monitor the progress of any projects, we can be pleased to support that. We don't have any problem to do that whatsoever. I'm not using it as a core. I'm really going to try to align ourselves up with all the action items that will be ultimately built into the strategic plan under the 4 themes and 21 focus areas, and any other directives that comes out of council from time to time on a week-to-week basis. So it's a very broad way to say it.
So to follow up on that, basically these items that are in progress and that everything's being wrapped up into this larger organizational process, and that to review this is not really necessary, and we can just sort of now trust that these items that might be
Unless council is of a mind that it would like to come back to this at another time and do a check-in on the progress of these items, we will not be bringing this back to you. We will be doing it through the course of the strategic plan and other directives that you're giving us, which may overlap with some of these.
I have a question on this, Guri. We have a motion here that we receive this for information. I'm just going to pass that.
You can do that right now, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And you have the marching orders for all the rest of it, I'm guessing?
So, thank you, Chair. So all of the motions that you have made will now form part of the next council's agenda under consent items, where you've said to no longer proceed with a number of motions. So you voted on those individually. You did all of those motions individually, so we do have them all.
So I'd be looking for a motion to receive.
So moved.
Councillor Martman, second by Councillor Hammonds.
Can't we do a little more than that, though? I guess just procedurally, I'm confused. Receiving for information, but...
I think we should do
We did a bunch of them, and then now we're receiving the rest for information.
So,
Councillor Gesselbach.
so in terms of looking back at this thing, we all agree we don't need to do that anymore, and we'll just get it through.
You can ask for
We've
it.
dealt, it's been dealt with.
I kind of sort of disagree because I do think the facilities master plan is important, but I think there's other mechanisms that have been captured by Mr. Rudolph that will address that.
Yeah.
So I just think it's a good guideline to see that, you know, I would rely on his expertise more, that this is where we're taking this.
Your Worship, through Councillor Armstrong, this is Mr. Chair, through Councillor Armstrong. This is an item that's in the work plan, and we will be reporting back to you on the facilities separately. It may have been launched, but I think it would have been happening anyway, even though. So just in the context of reporting back on the progress of the items in the core services review, unless you specifically instruct us to do that, we will not be doing that. We will be following now the strategic plan and other priorities as established by this council.
So it's basically what I said.
So I have motion on the table. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
No. Environmental responsibility.
We don't have anything under item C or D. So we're moving along to the question period. We have one speaker who would like to ask a question. That's Mr. Manners regarding core attachment A, number 63 for clarification.
63.
Go ahead, sir.
Members of the committee, the question that I have for you is regarding the Departure Bay Activity Center. Before this comes to council for voting on, the amateur radio clubs would appreciate getting a letter from Mr. Harding or from whoever is appropriate regarding that particular item. It's something that the club's been worried about since prior to 2010. Every year we get asked what's happening with our building, and we don't know. So if we could get some form of idea on where we will be moving ahead in the future, if what you passed today gets passed by council.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Manners, I think what we were doing today is we're striking it from the core services review, kind of things to do, recognizing that that conversation will be happening under the facilities master plan or the Parks and Rec master plan that's going forward. So I say that to share that I don't think, there's no immediate danger of this closing. We're just taking this out of our work plan because it's already duplicated in another work plan.
So in other words, we're to keep waiting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
No, this is good news.
This is good news. This one said to remove it.
And yes, I know that.
Okay, we have no other questions. So I would now look for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
I missed it. I know.
All those in favor?